The building breathed in the darkness, and Daniel Shaw listened. 42 floors of steel and glass rose above Manhattan like a monument to ambition, its mirrored surface catching the dying light of another October sunset. Sterling Tower had stood on this corner of 42nd Street for 37 years, watching the city transform around it, surviving recessions and booms and the slow erosion of time that reduced everything eventually to rubble. The tourists who passed beneath its shadow saw only another skyscraper, another temple to corporate power, indistinguishable from 100 others. They did not see what Daniel saw. He pressed his palm against a pipe in the sub-basement and felt the tremor that had been growing stronger for 3 days. The copper was warm beneath his calloused fingers, warmer than it should have been, and somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure, a valve was failing. He could hear it if he listened carefully enough. A faint whistle beneath the hum of generators and the steady pulse of water through miles of hidden channels. The building was telling him something. It always told him things if he bothered to pay attention. 15 years he had worked in the bowels of Sterling Tower, crawling through spaces most people did not know existed, fixing problems before they became catastrophes. He knew every pipe, every wire, every crack in the foundation that the original architects had never documented. He knew which elevators stuck between floors on humid days and which air handling units would fail if pushed past 70% capacity. He knew the names of the night janitors and the security guards, and the woman who ran the coffee cart in the lobby knew their children's birthdays and their struggles with rent and the small victories they celebrated when no one else was watching. What Daniel did not know was how much longer he could keep doing this. His knees ached from decades of crouching in cramped spaces. His lower back had not stopped hurting since a fall 3 years ago, a tumble down a maintenance ladder that should have sent him to the hospital, but instead sent him home to an empty apartment and a daughter who needed dinner and help with homework and a father who could not afford to be broken. He was 53 years old, and some mornings he moved like a man 20 years older, joints grinding against each other like machinery that had run too long without maintenance. But he kept showing up. He kept listening to the building's whispers. He kept fixing what was broken because that was what he did, what he had always done, and because a little girl depended on him to keep doing it. Lily Shaw was 8 years old, and the only reason Daniel still believed the world contained anything worth saving. She had her mother's eyes, brown and deep, and far too knowing for a child her age. She had learned to read adult expressions the way other children learn to read picture books, scanning faces for signs of trouble, adjusting her behavior to minimize whatever crisis might be brewing. She had stopped asking for things she knew her father could not afford, had learned to say she was not hungry when the refrigerator was empty, had mastered the art of cheerfulness when cheerfulness was the last thing she felt. 8 years old, and she had already become an expert in the small sacrifices that kept families from falling apart. Daniel thought about her now as he traced the source of the tremor through a maze of pipes and conduits. She would be at school, probably sitting in Mrs. Patterson's classroom, working on fractions, probably worrying about him even though she pretended not to. She always worried about him. She had started doing it the day her mother died, had stepped into the role of caretaker with a determination that broke his heart every time he saw it, Sarah. Even now, 3 years later, her name moved through him like electricity. They had met in a VA hospital waiting room in 2003, two strangers surrounded by broken men and the smell of antiseptic in the particular silence of places where hope went to die. Daniel had just returned from his second tour in Afghanistan, his head full of sounds he could not unhear and images he could not unsee. Sarah had been there for her brother, a Marine who had lost both legs to an IED outside Fallujah. She had looked at Daniel with eyes that saw straight through the 1,000-yard stare to something worth saving beneath it, and she had smiled, and in that smile he had found a reason to keep breathing. They married 6 months later in a courthouse ceremony attended by exactly 4 people. They moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Queens that smelled like mildew and possibility. They built a life together out of nothing. 2 people who had seen enough darkness to appreciate every small moment of light. When Lily was born in 2015, Daniel had held his daughter in the delivery room and wept because he had not believed himself capable of creating something so perfect. Sarah had watched him cry with that knowing smile of hers. "This is what we were waiting for," she had said. "This is why we survived everything else." She had been right. She had always been right about the things that mattered. The cancer came without warning, the way cancer always comes. One day Sarah was complaining about stomach pain and fatigue, And Daniel told her it was stress, told her to take it easy, told her they would see a doctor when things calmed down at work. 6 weeks later, she was in a hospital bed with tubes in her arms and a diagnosis that sounded like a death sentence because it was one. Pancreatic cancer stage 4 metastasized to the liver and lungs. The oncologist spoke in percentages and treatment options and 5-year survival rates. But Daniel heard only the spaces between the words, the silences that contained all the things doctors could not bring themselves to say. Sarah lasted 4 months. She spent most of them in a hospice facility that smelled like disinfectant and dying flowers, holding Lily's hand and telling her stories about the future she would not live to see. She made Daniel promise to keep going to raise their daughter, right to find happiness again, even if it seemed impossible. She made him promise not to disappear into grief the way she had watched so many others disappear. "I need you to stay visible," she had said near the end, her voice barely a whisper. "Promise me you will not become invisible," he had promised. He had held her hand as she slipped away, and he had kept holding it for hours afterward because letting go meant admitting she was really gone. And then he had gone home to a 5-year-old girl who did not understand why mommy was not coming back, and he had somehow found the strength to be what she needed, even though every cell in his body wanted to curl up and die alongside his wife. 3 years. It felt like yesterday and forever at the same time. Daniel finished tracing the tremor to its source, a failing pressure valve in the secondary water system. It would need replacing within the week, or the whole system risked a catastrophic failure that would flood half the lower floors. He made a mental note to file a maintenance request, knowing already that it would probably be denied due to budget constraints, knowing that he would end up fixing it himself with parts scavenged from other systems, because that was how things worked in buildings where profit mattered more than infrastructure. He checked his watch. 3:15. Lily would be getting out of school soon, would be making her way to the after-school program, where she spent 2 hours every day waiting for him to finish work. He hated that she had to wait. He hated that he could not be there to pick her up like the other parents, the ones with normal jobs and normal schedules and enough money to afford childcare that did not double as a holding pen. But he did what he could with what he had, and what he had was a maintenance job that paid $17 an hour and a willingness to work harder than anyone else in the building. The intercom on his belt crackled to life. "Daniel, we have a situation on 15. HVAC is acting up again." He recognized the voice. Tommy Rodriguez, the youngest member of the security team, a 23-year-old kid from the Bronx, who had taken this job to pay for night school. Tommy was one of the good ones, always respectful, always willing to help, even when it was not his responsibility. Daniel had fixed his grandmother's furnace last winter for free because that was what you did for people who treated you like a human being. Daniel pressed the talk button. "On my way. What are the symptoms? Whole floor is getting hot. People are complaining. Building management, it is freaking out because there is some big meeting happening upstairs and they are worried it is going to spread." Daniel's stomach tightened. He knew what big meeting meant. The Hartley-Wells merger, the deal that had consumed every conversation in the executive suites for months. $2.3 billion on the line, enough money to reshape the company's future and determine whether hundreds of people kept their jobs or found themselves on the street. He had heard the whispers in the hallways, the nervous speculation among the cleaning staff and security guards, who always knew more about what was really happening than the people who signed their paychecks. "I will be there in 5 minutes, Daniel said. "Tell them to stay calm." He started moving through the sub-basement, his body shifting into a higher gear, despite the protests from his joints. The HVAC system on the middle floors had been temperamental for months, ever since some genius in facilities management had decided to install new projection equipment in the executive conference rooms without consulting anyone who actually understood how the building's infrastructure worked. Daniel had warned them in a maintenance report 8 months ago that the new equipment would overload the electrical circuits and create cascading failures throughout the climate control system. His report had been rejected because the recommended fixes were not in the budget. Now the chickens were coming home to roost, and Daniel would be expected to perform miracles with duct tape and determination, while the people who had ignored his warnings pretended the problem had come from nowhere. He took the service elevator to the 15th floor, the ancient machinery groaning in protest as it lifted him through the building's core. The elevator smelled like machine oil, an old rubber, familiar scents that had become synonymous with his working life. He had spent more time in this elevator than in his own living room, had eaten countless lunches here, while traveling between floors, had once spent 3 hours trapped inside when the mechanism failed during a blackout. The building's official elevators were sleek and modern and smelled like expensive air freshener, but Daniel preferred this one. It was honest about what it was. The doors opened onto chaos. The 15th floor was an open-plan office space filled with cubicles and the particular desperation of middle managers trying to meet impossible deadlines. Normally it hummed with the white noise of productivity, keyboards clicking, and phones ringing, and the constant murmur of people pretending to be busy. Now it felt like a sauna. Employees were fanning themselves with folders, loosening ties, gathering in clusters, near the few windows that could be opened. The climate control vents were pushing warm air instead of cool, and Daniel could feel the building straining around him, systems fighting against each other, in a battle that would only end one way if he did not intervene. He moved through the space without waiting for permission, heading for the maintenance access panel in the corner that most people did not even know existed. A few employees looked up as he passed, registered the maintenance uniform, and the purposeful stride then went back to their complaints. Daniel was used to being invisible. It was part of the job description. The access panel led to a narrow corridor filled with pipes and wiring, the hidden circulatory system that kept the building alive. Daniel squeezed through spaces designed for men half his size, years of practice, allowing him to navigate obstacles that would have defeated anyone unfamiliar with the building's secret geography. He could hear the problem before he saw it, a high-pitched whine coming from the main air handling unit. The sound of machinery pushed past its breaking point. The unit was a massive metal box covered in dust and warning labels, one of dozens scattered throughout the building that most people never thought about until something went wrong. Daniel checked the gauges and felt his concern deepen. The system was running at 112% capacity, trying to compensate for failures in other parts of the network, burning itself out in the process. The new projector in the executive conference room was drawing more power than the circuit could handle, and the building's automated systems were trying to balance the load by pushing everything else harder. He had told them this would happen. He had written it down in clear language that anyone could understand. And they had ignored him because he was just a maintenance worker, just a janitor with ideas above his station, just another replaceable cog in a machine that valued quarterly profits over basic functionality. Daniel took a deep breath and started working. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting valves and rerouting airflow, coaxing the overtaxed system back from the edge of failure. He could not fix the underlying problem without a complete overhaul of the electrical system, but he could buy time, could keep everything running long enough for the people upstairs to finish their important meeting and forget that anything had ever been wrong. It took 45 minutes to stabilize the system. By the time he finished, his shirt was soaked with sweat and his arms trembled from working in cramped positions. But the temperature on the 15th floor was dropping, the emergency indicators were returning to normal, and the building was breathing easier. He checked his watch again. 4:30. Lily would be wondering where he was. Daniel made his way back to the service elevator, already composing the incident report he would have to file. He knew what would happen to it. The report would go to his supervisor, who would send it to building management, who would file it somewhere. It would never be read. No one would authorize the repairs he recommended. No one would acknowledge that the problem could have been prevented. And in a few weeks or months, the system would fail again, and Daniel would be expected to work another miracle, while the people who made decisions pretended it was not their fault. This was his life. This was what 15 years of dedication had earned him. A broken body, a struggling paycheck, and the knowledge that no matter how hard he worked, no matter how many problems he solved, he would never be seen as anything more than the guy who fixed things when they broke. The elevator opened on the 40th floor by mistake, a glitch in the aging system that happens sometimes when the circuit's overheated. Daniel reached for the button to continue downward, then stopped. The doors had opened onto the executive level, the rarefied atmosphere where the people who actually ran Sterling Tower conducted their business. The floor was all polished marble in modern art, in the kind of silence that only money could buy. Daniel had been up here before for maintenance emergencies, but always under escort, always watched as though he might steal something if left unattended. The executive stall did not welcome people like him. He should have closed the doors and continued on his way. Instead, he stepped out. The air on the 40th floor was perfect. Cool, fresh, precisely calibrated to maintain optimal conditions for executives and their important thoughts. Daniel stood in the hallway and breathed it in, feeling the sweat on his skin begin to evaporate, feeling his overheated body finally start to cool down. He had been working in temperatures that made the 15th floor feel comfortable, crawling through spaces where the heat built up like an oven, pushing himself past the point where most people would have quit. And now he was standing in climate-controlled perfection, breathing air that cost more to condition than he made in a month. He should not be here. He knew that. But his body was screaming for relief, and his vision had started to blur from heat exhaustion. And if he did not cool down soon, he was going to collapse somewhere much more dangerous than an empty hallway. The executive lounge was at the end of the corridor, a room he had seen only through open doors and in architectural blueprints. It had its own climate control system independent of the building's main network, designed to ensure that important people never experienced a moment of discomfort. Daniel walked toward it with the intention of spending 5 minutes recovering before returning to his endless list of repairs. 5 minutes, that was all he needed. 5 minutes of cool air and a chance to stop shaking before he passed out. The lounge was empty. Leather furniture, original artwork, a bar stocked with liquors that cost more than his monthly rent. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that looked like something from a movie, the city spread out below like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Daniel chose a seat near the door, ready to leave at the first sign of anyone approaching, and let himself sink into cushions that probably cost more than his car. The cool air washed over him like mercy. He closed his eyes and felt his heartbeat slow, felt the dizziness recede, felt his body remember what it was like to exist at a temperature that did not threaten organ failure. He would rest for just a moment, just long enough to recover. Then he would go back to work, back to the endless cycle of repairs and reports that no one read and problems that no one wanted to acknowledge. He did not hear the door open. "What the hell do you think you are doing?" The voice cut through the room like a blade sharp and cold and accustomed to obedience. Daniel's eyes snapped open, his body already tensing for confrontation that even before his mind caught up with what was happening. He saw expensive shoes, first patent leather heels that clicked against the marble floor like gunshots. Then a tailored suit that probably cost more than his annual salary. Then a face that he recognized from countless company newsletters and financial news programs, and the portrait that hung in the lobby for everyone to see. Elizabeth Sterling stood in the doorway like a queen confronting a trespasser in her throne room. She was younger than he expected, only 32, according to the articles he had read, though she carried herself with the authority of someone twice her age. Dark hair pulled back in a severe style that accentuated the sharpness of her features. Eyes that seemed to calculate the value of everything they touched and find most of it wanting. She was beautiful in the way that weapons were beautiful, elegant and deadly, and designed for a single purpose. Daniel started to rise from the chair. "Ms. Sterling, the HVAC system on 15 through 22 failed. I needed to cool down before I passed out. This is the only room with working climate control. I just needed 5 minutes." She crossed the space between them with predatory grace, 3 security guards materializing behind her like shadows given form. Daniel recognized one of them, a man named Peters, who had worked nights for the past decade, and who always nodded respectfully when they passed in the halls. Peters was not nodding now. He was staring at the floor, his face carefully blank, refusing to meet Daniel's eyes. "You think you can just walk into my executive lounge?" Elizabeth's voice rose with each word, disbelief transforming into fury. "You think the rules do not apply to you? I was not walking in for fun." Daniel kept his voice level, even though his hands wanted to clench into fists. "The building systems are failing. I have been working in conditions that could kill someone for the past 2 hours. I needed to cool down. I do not care if you were dying." She moved closer, invading his space, daring him to retreat. "Your maintenance, you do not belong here. You never belonged here." Behind her, the security guards shifted uncomfortably. Daniel could see it in their body language, the tension of men caught between duty and conscience. They knew him. Everyone in the building knew him. He was the guy they called at 2 in the morning when the boiler exploded. The guy who remembered their kids' birthdays and covered their shifts when they needed time off. The guy who had once carried a heart attack victim down 18 flights of stairs when the elevators jammed during a power outage. He had given 15 years of his life to this building, and now he was being treated like a criminal for needing 5 minutes to recover from keeping it running. "Ms. Sterling, One of the guards started to speak, his voice hesitant. "Did I ask you to speak?" The guard fell silent. No one else moved. Elizabeth turned back to Daniel, her eyes cold and calculating. He could see her processing him, categorizing him, filing him away in whatever mental systems she used to organize the world into people who mattered and people who did not. He had seen that look before in officers who treated enlisted men like furniture, in executives who walked past janitors without seeing them, and everyone who had ever decided that some people were worth less than others based on the clothes they wore or the work they did. 15 years. The words came out before Daniel could stop them, quiet but firm. "I have worked in this building for 15 years. I know every pipe, every wire, every crack in the foundation. I have kept this place running through 3 blackouts, 2 floods, and a fire that should have taken the whole East Wing. I have given up nights and weekends and holidays because this building needed me. And you are throwing me out because I needed 5 minutes to catch my breath." Elizabeth stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume. Expensive, sharp something that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. It was nothing like the industrial cleaner that lived in his pores, that had seeped into his skin so deeply he could not wash it out even after multiple showers. "Let me make something clear." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting. "I do not care how long you have been here. I do not care what you think you have done. You are replaceable. Everyone in this building is replaceable. The only thing that matters is results. And right now, the only result I see is a janitor who forgot his place." The word janitor landed like a slap. Daniel was technically a maintenance supervisor, a title he had earned through years of hard work and certification courses paid for with money he did not have. But people like Elizabeth did not see distinctions like that. They saw uniforms and service corridors and the invisible army that kept their world running while they pretended it ran itself. He felt something twist in his gut. Not anger, not exactly. He had learned to bury anger a long time ago, had pushed it down so deep that most days he forgot it was there. This was something older, more familiar. The same feeling he had known when the army discharged him after Sarah's death, when the hospital bills consumed his savings, when he had stood in line at the food bank praying that Lily would not notice they were eating donated groceries. He was being erased. Again. "Daddy." The voice came from the doorway, small, scared, barely louder than a whisper. Lily stood there in her faded backpack, her hair escaping from its braid the way it always did by the end of the school day. Her eyes were locked on the badge that still hung from Daniel's lanyard, the plastic card that identified him as someone who belonged here, someone who had earned the right to walk these halls. She looked from the badge to her father's face to the woman standing over him, like a judge passing sentence, and something shifted in her expression. Daniel's heart stopped. "Lily, what are you doing here? Mrs. Patterson sent me." The tremor in her voice was barely controlled. "You forgot to sign my permission slip for the field trip." She held up a crumpled piece of paper, the form that had been sitting on Daniel's kitchen counter for a week waiting for a signature that kept getting delayed by emergencies and overtime and the endless demands of a building that needed more than he could give. Elizabeth looked at the little girl the way she might look at an insect that had wandered into a boardroom. Unwanted, inconvenient, something to be removed. "Get her out of here." Elizabeth's voice carried the certainty of someone accustomed to having their orders followed without question. "Both of them. Now, wait." Lily stepped forward, and something in her face shifted. The fear melted into something else, something harder. Daniel had seen that expression before, usually when Lily was defending a classmate from bullies or arguing with teachers who underestimated her. It was Sarah's expression, the look his wife used to get when she was about to say something that needed saying regardless of the consequences. "You are the lady from the big office." Lily's voice was steady now, childish but certain. "The one with all the windows." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, clearly unused to being addressed by 8-year-olds. "My daddy talks about you sometimes. He says you work really hard. He says you never go home." For a fraction of a second, so brief that Daniel almost missed it, Elizabeth's mask cracked. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers curled at her sides. Something flickered behind her eyes there and gone before he could identify it. He also says Lily continued her gaze unwavering, that some people look at things, but they do not really see them. Like when the building makes noises at night and nobody listens except him. He says that is why things break, because people stop paying attention. Elizabeth stared at the little girl. 8 years old, messy hair, secondhand shoes, speaking truth that cut deeper than any boardroom attack. The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. "Get them out," Elizabeth said again, but her voice had changed, quieter, colder, like she was trying to freeze something before it thawed. "Now." The security guards moved forward. Peters finally met Daniel's eyes as he approached, and Daniel saw something there that might have been apology, might have been shame. It did not matter. None of it mattered. Peters had bills to pay, too, a family that depended on him, a job he could not afford to lose by standing up for a maintenance worker who had crossed the wrong line. Daniel took Lily's hand and let himself be escorted toward the elevator. He did not fight. He did not argue. He had been in enough battles to know when one was already lost. The elevator doors opened, and Daniel stepped inside, pulling Lily gently with him. He turned to face Elizabeth one last time, this woman who had decided his worth based on his uniform, who had judged 15 years of dedication and found it meaningless. She was already turning away, already dismissing him from her thoughts, already moving on to more important matters. The doors began to close. Lily did not say goodbye. Neither did Daniel. The elevator descended through the building's core, carrying them away from the executive level and everything it represented. Daniel watched the floor numbers drop and felt something drop inside him too, a weight settling in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He had known this day might come eventually. He had always known that the invisible people who kept the world running were only one bad encounter away from being reminded of their place. But knowing something and experiencing it were different things. "Daddy." Lily's voice was small in the enclosed space. "Did I say something wrong?" Daniel looked down at his daughter, at the worried crease between her eyebrows and the way she was clutching the unsigned permission slip like a lifeline. She was so young to carry so much concern, so young to understand that the world could be cruel to people who did not deserve cruelty. "No, sweetheart." He squeezed her hand. "You said something true. That is different." But she looked so mad. Sometimes the truth makes people mad, especially when they are not ready to hear it. The elevator continued its descent. 35 floors, 30, 25. Each one a year of his life he would never get back, memories of problems solved and crises averted, an appreciation that had never come. "She took your badge." Lily was looking at his chest, at the empty space where his identification had hung for 15 years. Daniel had not even noticed Elizabeth taking it, but the lanyard was gone, the plastic card that granted access to a building he now had no right to enter. He reached into his pocket and found the broken pieces there, cracked and useless evidence of how quickly a life could be dismantled. "It is okay," he said, though nothing was okay, and they both knew it. "We will figure it out." The elevator reached the lobby with a soft chime. The doors opened onto marble floors and corporate artwork, and the particular hush of a space designed to impress visitors with how much money had been spent on appearances. Daniel walked through it with his daughter's hand in his, past the security desk, where guards he had known for years suddenly found other things to look at, past the reception area, where the young woman at the desk was carefully pretending he did not exist, past the revolving doors that separated the world inside Sterling Tower from the world outside. The October air hit him like cold water, a shock after the climate-controlled perfection he had just left. The sun was setting behind the Manhattan skyline, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if he had been able to appreciate them. Pedestrians flowed around them on the sidewalk, hundreds of strangers hurrying to destinations that did not include him, lives continuing while his fell apart. Daniel stopped at the corner and took stock of his situation. He had $47 in his checking account. Rent was due in 6 days. Lily's school lunch balance was negative. The landlord had already slipped 2 notices under his door, warnings that had grown increasingly hostile with each passing week. He was 53 years old, a widower, a veteran with a bad knee and no college degree, and he had just been fired by a woman who had never bothered to learn his name. "Daddy." Lily tugged his sleeve. "What are we going to do?" Daniel looked down at his daughter. She was trying so hard to be brave, trying so hard not to cry, just like she had at her mother's funeral 3 years ago, when she had held his hand through the whole service and never let go. She had learned too young that sometimes the people you loved could not protect you from the things that hurt. "We are going to be okay." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "We always are." He did not believe it. He could not imagine how any of this was going to be okay. But that was what fathers said to their children when the world was falling apart, because the alternative was admitting that the world was falling apart and children deserve better than that. They walked toward the subway station 2 blocks away, Daniel's mind already racing through impossible calculations. How much food could $47 buy? How many days could they stretch it? Who could he call for help without admitting how bad things had gotten? The questions multiplied like cells dividing each one, spawning new questions that had no good answers. Lily hummed something to herself as they walked, a melody Daniel did not recognize. She did that when she was trying not to think about hard things, filled the silence with sound to drown out the noise in her head. He had watched Sarah do the same thing during the months when the bills piled up and the fear became a constant companion. Some coping mechanisms were inherited, passed down from mother to daughter, like eye color or the shape of a smile. 22 minutes later, his phone rang. They were descending the steps to the subway platform when the vibration started in his pocket. Daniel almost did not answer. He was tired, beaten down, ready to disappear underground and let the city swallow him for a few hours. But then he glanced at the screen and saw a number he recognized. The building's main line. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and answered, "Mr. Shaw." The voice on the other end was panicked breath coming in short gasps. Tommy Rodriguez, the young security guard who had stood silent while Elizabeth destroyed him. "Mr. Shaw, you need to come back. Right now. I do not work there anymore. The building is dead. Everything. Lights, elevators, backup systems, all of it. The Hartley Wells people are stuck between floors, and Miss Sterling has her big signing in 20 minutes, and nobody knows what to do." Daniel stood in the subway station, surrounded by the rumble of approaching trains and the press of commuters flowing past him like water around a rock. He watched them go, these strangers with their own problems and their own destinations, and he thought about what Tommy was telling him. "Not my problem. Daniel, please." Tommy's voice cracked. "There are people trapped in those elevators. Old people, scared people, and the fire department cannot get here for another 30 minutes because there is a pileup on the bridge." Lily was watching him, her small face tilted up in question. She could not hear what Tommy was saying, but she could read her father's expression better than anyone else alive. She knew something had changed, the HVAC failure. Daniel said it slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind. The new projector they installed in the executive conference room. It overloaded the main breaker. "Did it not? I do not." "How did you know?" "And the backup generators are not kicking in because nobody ever replaced the capacitor I flagged in my report 8 months ago. The one that got rejected because it was not in the budget." Silence on the other end, the sound of a young man realizing that everything happening was preventable, that someone had tried to warn them and been ignored. "That about right?" Daniel asked. "Yeah." Tommy's voice was barely audible. "That is exactly right." Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about Elizabeth Sterling ripping the badge from his chest, the look in her eyes like he was nothing less than nothing. He thought about the $47 in his account, the rent due in 6 days, the job interviews he would have to endure at his age with no reference from his last employer. He should walk away, let them figure it out themselves. Let Elizabeth Sterling learn what happened when you threw away the people who actually kept the world running. But then he thought about the old people trapped in those elevators, shared alone, wondering if anyone was coming for them. And he thought about Maria in accounting, who always saved him a cookie from the break room because she knew he skipped lunch to save money. He thought about Tommy, 23 years old, and just trying to do right in a world that made doing right almost impossible. He thought about the night janitors who depended on him to fix the heater before winter hit, the security guards who needed the building to keep running so they could keep getting paid. They had not chosen this. They were not responsible for Elizabeth Sterling's cruelty or the budget decisions that had led to this moment. They were just people trying to survive, same as him. "Daddy," Lily was watching him with those eyes that saw too much. "You are going back, are you not?" Daniel looked at his daughter. This fierce, stubborn, too smart little girl who had already lost so much, who deserved a father who could give her stability instead of chaos. "Yeah," he said it like a confession. "I am, even though she was mean to you." "Even though," Lily nodded slowly, processing this information with the same seriousness she brought to everything. Then her chin lifted, a gesture he recognized from 1,000 arguments and negotiations, and moments when she had decided something and refused to be moved. "Okay, but I am coming with you, Lily. You cannot." You said we are a team. Her eyes locked onto his with fierce determination. Teams do not split up, Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her to wait at the McDonald's on the corner where it was safe and warm and far from Elizabeth Sterling. But Lily's expression was set in stone, immovable, exactly like her mother's used to be when she had made up her mind about something important. All right, he heard himself say it and wondered when he had become the kind of father who let his 8-year-old accompany him into chaos. Let us go. They emerged from the subway station and started back towards Sterling Tower, moving against the flow of pedestrian traffic. The sun had finished setting while they talked, and the city was transforming into its nighttime version, lights flickering on in windows and the pulse of evening energy replacing the exhausted rush of commuters heading home. Daniel walked faster as they got closer, his body remembering the urgency, even as his mind questioned the wisdom of returning. Lily kept pace beside him, her short legs working double time to match his stride, her face set with the same determination that had carried her through her mother's illness and death and the hard years that followed. The lobby of Sterling Tower was visible through the glass doors, and Daniel could see that something was very wrong. The usual flood of light was replaced by the dim red glow of emergency systems. Shadows moved behind the glass, panicked silhouettes of people who had no idea what to do. He pushed through the revolving door and stepped into chaos. Emergency lights painted everything in crimson, transforming the familiar space into something apocalyptic. People huddled in corners, some crying, some shouting into dead phones that could not connect to the outside world. Security guards moved through the crowd, trying to maintain order, but Daniel could see they were failing. This was beyond anything they had trained for. Daniel pushed through the confusion, Lily's hand locked firmly in his. He moved with purpose, with direction, like a man who knew exactly where he was going. Because he did. Daniel. Tommy appeared from the crowd, his face slick with sweat, relief flooding his features. Thank God. It is bad, really bad. I know. Daniel was already heading toward the service corridor, the hidden pathway that led to the building's heart. The main junction is in the sub-basement. If I can reroute power from the emergency grid, I can get the elevators moving. But the fail-safe, Tommy jogged to keep up. The automatic shutoff that is supposed to prevent electrical fires. Forget the fail-safe. The fail-safe is dead. That is part of the problem. I need to bypass it manually. Can you do that? Daniel reached the service elevator, the old manual one that nobody used anymore, because it was slow and loud and smelled like decades of accumulated grime. He pulled open the gate and stepped inside, turning to help Lily through the narrow opening. Guess we will find out. Tommy watched them go, his young face tight with worry. Daniel appreciated the concern, but he did not have time for it. Every minute the building stayed dark was another minute that scared people were trapped in elevators, another minute that Elizabeth Sterling's deal was falling apart, another minute that chaos spread through a system designed to function in harmony. The old elevator descended with agonizing slowness, gears grinding and cables groaning in protest. Daniel listened to the sounds and knew that this elevator too would need maintenance soon. Another item on a list that would never be addressed, another failure waiting to happen. Daddy, Lily's voice was small in the enclosed space. Is this elevator safe enough? Daniel put his arm around her shoulders. I have ridden this thing 1,000 times. It just complains a lot. Like Mr. Henderson next door, Daniel felt a smile tug at his mouth despite everything. Yeah, exactly like Mr. Henderson. The elevator stopped with a shudder and the gate opened onto the sub-basement. Daniel stepped out into darkness so complete that it felt solid, a physical presence pressing against him from all sides. His hand found the flashlight on his belt, and he clicked it on, watching the beam cut through the black like a blade. Stay close to me. He reached back and took Lily's hand. Do not touch anything and do not let go. Understand? I understand. They moved forward into the maze. The sub-basement was a place most people never saw, a warren of pipes and conduits and machinery that formed the building's circulatory system. Daniel navigated it by memory and instinct, his flashlight beam dancing across surfaces that were as familiar to him as the walls of his own apartment. He had spent more hours down here than he could count, had eaten lunches in these corridors, had solved problems that no one else even knew existed. The building talked to him. It always talked to him. He could hear it now, the wheeze of dying pumps and the groan of overloaded circuits and the desperate hum of systems trying to stay alive. It was telling him where the pain was, where the damage had occurred, where he needed to go to make things right. Here, Daniel stopped in front of a junction box covered in warning labels and dust. This is where the main power feed connects to the backup systems. He opened the box and shone his flashlight inside. The damage was worse than he had feared. The surge from the overloaded circuit had blown through the main breaker and jumped to the secondary systems, creating a cascade failure that had taken out redundancy after redundancy. It was the electrical equivalent of a heart attack, multiple systems failing at once in a chain reaction that should not have been possible if anyone had listened to his warnings. "Can you fix it?" Lily's voice came from behind him, small but steady. "Maybe." Daniel studied the tangled mess of wires and burned components. "But I need to reroute power from the emergency reserves. That means bypassing about 6 different safety protocols that exist for very good reasons." "Will it be dangerous?" Daniel turned to look at his daughter. Her face was pale in the flashlight's glow, her eyes wide with a fear she was trying very hard to hide. She was 8 years old, and she was standing in the dark heart of a dying building, trusting her father to make everything okay. Yeah, he would not lie to her. She deserved better than lies, it might be. Lily nodded, accepting this information the way she accepted everything, with a maturity that no child should have to develop. "You have done dangerous things before." "In the army, Mom told me stories." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "She said you always came back." Always. The memory of Sarah hit him like a wave, her voice in his ear telling Lily bedtime stories about a father who had survived impossible things. Sarah had always believed in him, even when he did not believe in himself. She had made him promise to stay visible, to keep going, to be the father their daughter needed. He could not break that promise now. "I will come back." Daniel said it like a vow. "I promise." He turned back to the junction box and went to work. His hands moved from memory testing connections and tracing faults, coaxing the old systems back to life the way he had done 100 times before. The box was hot, residual heat from the surge that had torn through it. The wiring was frayed, insulation melted in places, copper exposed in ways that made his skin prickle, with awareness of the voltage waiting to be released. One wrong move, and he would fry himself. The electricity did not care about intentions or promises or little girls waiting in the darkness. It followed the path of least resistance, and if Daniel made himself that path, it would kill him without hesitation. But he did not stop, did not hesitate, because somewhere above him, people were trapped in the dark, scared and helpless, and waiting for someone to save them. The first connection sparked when he touched it, blue light arcing through the darkness. Lily gasped behind him, but did not cry out. Daniel worked faster, his fingers finding the pattern through instinct and experience, rerouting power around the damaged sections, building a new path for electricity to flow. On the 40th floor of Sterling Tower, Elizabeth Sterling paced the executive lounge like a caged predator. The emergency lights painted her face in shades of blood red, transforming her features into something harsh and unfamiliar. Her phone was dead. Her laptop was dead. Her $2.3 billion deal was dying, while she stood powerless in the dark, unable to do anything but wait. The Hartley Wells people are still trapped. Her operations manager delivered the news with the careful neutrality of someone who expected to be blamed. "Fire department is 15 minutes out, maybe longer with the bridge backup. And our system's still offline. Nobody knows why. Our IT team is locked out of everything." Elizabeth felt something cold settling in her chest, a sensation she recognized from other moments of crisis. Control slipping through her fingers, certainty giving way to chaos. The carefully constructed order of her world crumbling into something she could not manage or predict. She had built her entire life around control. Every decision calculated, every risk assessed, every variable accounted for. She had clawed her way to the top of a Fortune 500 company by the age of 32, had proven wrong. Everyone who said she was too young, too female, too inexperienced to fill her father's shoes. She had sacrificed everything, her marriage, her health, her relationship with her daughter, to prove that she deserved to be here. And now it was all falling apart because of something she could not see, could not understand, could not control. Ms. Sterling. Her security chief stepped forward with the hesitance of someone delivering bad news. "There is something you should know." "What?" Marcus Reed. He came back. Elizabeth's whole body went rigid. the maintenance worker she had fired less than an hour ago, the man whose badge she had torn from his chest in front of his child, the janitor who had dared to rest in her executive lounge like he belonged there. You called him, Danny did. The security chief could not meet her eyes. He was the only one who knew how to fix this. I fired him. I personally fired him. I threw his badge on the ground in front of his daughter. And you called him back. The accusation in her voice was not really aimed at the security chief. It was aimed at herself, at the universe, at the cruel irony of a moment that forced her to depend on someone she had just destroyed. She had been wrong about him. Some part of her had known it even as she was doing it, even as she was ripping away his dignity and his livelihood. She had seen the steadiness in his eyes, the refusal to be diminished, the quiet strength that had nothing to do with power or position. She had seen those things and chosen to ignore them because acknowledging them would have required admitting that her judgment was not infallible. Ma'am, the operations manager's voice was tight with controlled panic. If he does not get those systems back online in the next 10 minutes, the Hartley Wells partners are walking. And once they walk, this deal is dead. We will be the laughingstock of every business publication in the country. Elizabeth closed her eyes. She thought about Daniel Shaw standing in her lounge, sweat-soaked and exhausted from keeping her building alive. She thought about the way he had looked at her when she called him replaceable, the flash of something in his eyes that was not anger, but something older, deeper. She thought about his daughter, 8 years old and fearless, speaking truths that cut through all of Elizabeth's defenses. Some people look at things, but they do not really see them. Elizabeth's hands were shaking. She did not know why. Come on. She muttered the words under her breath, a prayer to someone she had stopped believing in long ago. Come on, you stubborn bastard. Fix it. In the darkness of the sub-basement, Daniel made his final connection. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. The darkness remained absolute, the silence complete. Daniel held his breath and waited, his fingers still touching the wires he had just jointed, his entire body tense for the shock that would mean he had failed. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and the building roared back to life. The pumps hummed, the circuits sang. The emergency grid handed off to main power with a clunk that echoed through the walls like a heartbeat restarting. Around Daniel, the sub-basement transformed from a tomb into a living space, shadows retreating before the fluorescent lights that flickered on one by one. Daniel slumped against the junction box, sweat dripping down his face, his whole body trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. Daddy. Lily's arms wrapped around him from behind, small and fierce and strong. You did it. He held her tight, feeling her heart beating against his chest, feeling the reality of her presence like an anchor in a storm. She was safe. The building was alive. And somewhere above him, people were stepping out of elevators, blinking in the sudden light, wondering who had saved them. They would never know his name. And that was okay. That had always been okay. Come on, sweetheart. Daniel pulled himself to his feet, his body protesting every movement. Let us go home. They made their way back through the sub-basement, Lily's hand in his, the building humming around them with renewed life. The service elevator was working again, its ancient machinery responding to the restoration of power with the same reliability it had shown for decades. Daniel rode it up with his daughter beside him, watching the floor numbers climb, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling into his bones. The lobby was still chaotic when they emerged, but the chaos had transformed into something else. Relief celebration, the giddy aftermath of a crisis averted. People were laughing and hugging, sharing the particular joy of survivors who had been pulled back from the edge. Daniel moved through them toward the exit, invisible again, anonymous again, just another figure in the crowd. He was almost to the door when a voice stopped him. Wait, Daniel turned. Elizabeth Sterling stood at the entrance to the service corridor, alone. No security guards, no assistants, no entourage of people paid to make her feel important. Just her in her $1,000 suit and her carefully constructed armor, looking at the man she had tried to destroy. Daniel stopped. Lily's hand tightened in his. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The sounds of the lobby continued around them, oblivious to the confrontation happening at its edge. Elizabeth's face was unreadable in the restored light, her expression carefully controlled. You fixed it, I did. Why? Daniel looked at her, really looked past the expensive clothes and the corporate power and all the trappings of success that she wore like weapons. And for the first time, he saw something beneath the armor. Something tired, something wounded. something that looked almost like regret, because this building has a heartbeat. Daniel said it simply without accusation or anger. And I was not going to let it die. Not even for you. Elizabeth's jaw tightened. Her eyes glistened with something that might have been tears or might have been rage. It was impossible to tell. I was wrong. The words came out rough, like they had been dragged from somewhere deep inside her. About you. About everything. Daniel did not respond. He just took Lily's hand and started toward the lobby doors. Wait, Elizabeth's voice cracked on the word. Please, he stopped. I do not know how to do this. Her composure was crumbling now, the mask slipping away piece by piece. I do not know how to apologize. I have never, I have never been good at seeing people. Not really. Not the way you do. Daniel turned back to face her. Why not? Elizabeth opened her mouth, closed it. For a moment, she looked like a lost child trying to find her way home, all of her certainty and control stripped away. Because. Her voice was barely audible. The last time I let myself see someone, really see them, they died. And I could not save them. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and guilt and all the things that people carried in silence. Daniel did not ask who she meant, did not push. He just stood there holding his daughter's hand and let the silence do what words could not. Go home, Miss Sterling. He said it gently without judgment. Get some rest. The building is stable for now, but you will need a full crew in here tomorrow. What about you? Daniel smiled. It was tired, fine but real. I will figure it out. I always do. He and Lily walked toward the exit. The lobby was clearing now, people departing into the Manhattan night, returning to lives that had been briefly interrupted by forces beyond their control. Nobody looked at the man in the worn work clothes or the little girl in the second-hand shoes. They never did. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded in one of its countless towers. Daniel stood on the sidewalk and breathed in the cold October air, feeling it fill his lungs, feeling himself coming back to life after hours of existing on pure adrenaline. Daddy. Lily tugged his sleeve. Are you okay? Daniel looked down at his daughter. Her face was tired but calm, her eyes clear and steady. She had watched him perform what amounted to a miracle, had stood in darkness and waited while he risked his life for people who would never thank him. And now she was asking if he was okay, because even after everything, her first concern was for him. I am now. They started walking toward the subway, father and daughter moving through the city that never stopped moving. The problems waiting at home had not disappeared. The rent was still due. The bank account was still empty. The future was still uncertain. But somehow in this moment, none of that seemed as heavy as it had an hour ago. He had been seen tonight, not by the crowds who benefited from his work, not by the executives whose deal he had saved, but by the people who mattered. His daughter had watched him keep a promise. A woman who had tried to break him had admitted she was wrong, and he had proven to himself that the skills he had spent a lifetime developing were worth something, even if the world refused to acknowledge it. The subway platform was nearly empty at this hour, just a few late commuters waiting for trains that would carry them to destinations unknown. Daniel and Lily found a bench and sat down, shoulders touching the warmth of human contact, a comfort against the underground chill. You were really brave today, Lily said it quietly, almost to herself, like in Mom's stories. Daniel felt the familiar ache that came with any mention of Sarah. It never went away, that ache. It just became something he lived with, a permanent resident in the house of his heart. I just did what needed to be done. That is what brave is. Lily looked up at him with her mother's eyes. Doing what needs to be done even when you are scared. The train arrived with a rush of stale air and screeching brakes. They boarded and found seats surrounded by the late-night collection of New Yorkers who filled the subway after dark. Nobody paid them any attention. In a city of 8 million people, one tired man and his daughter were invisible, anonymous, lost in the crowd. But Daniel did not feel invisible anymore. Something had shifted in the last few hours, some internal balance that he had not even realized was off. He had been reminded that he mattered, that his skills had value, that the years he had spent becoming an expert in systems nobody understood were not wasted. Elizabeth Sterling had looked at him and finally seen him, had admitted that her judgment was not infallible. It was not much. It did not pay the rent or fill the refrigerator or guarantee that tomorrow would be any easier than today. But it was something. And right now, something was enough. They reached their stop and emerged onto familiar streets, walking the 3 blocks to their apartment building through neighborhoods that had seen better days. The street lights flickered overhead, some of them out entirely victims of a city budget that never seemed to include basic maintenance. Daniel made a mental note of which ones were dark and automatic reflex after years of noticing the things that most people overlooked. Their building was a 5-story walk-up with a lobby that smelled like old carpet and broken dreams. Daniel unlocked the front door and helped Lily up the stairs, her small hand in his, her footsteps heavy with the exhaustion of a day that had asked too much of both of them. The apartment was dark when they entered, the only light coming from the street lamp outside the window. Daniel flipped the switch and winced at the harsh illumination that revealed every flaw in their small space. The kitchen counter cluttered with bills, the couch with its sagging cushions, the photograph of Sarah on the bookshelf smiling at them from a past that felt like another lifetime. "I am hungry," Lily said it without complaint, a simple statement of fact. Daniel opened the refrigerator and surveyed its contents. Half a carton of eggs, some cheese that was questionable, a few vegetables that had seen better days. It was not much, but it was enough for dinner if he was creative. "How about omelets?" Lily's face brightened. With cheese, with cheese." They cooked together, moving around the small kitchen in the choreographed dance of two people who had learned to work in tight spaces. Lily cracked the eggs while Daniel chopped vegetables, their conversation light and easy, avoiding the heavy topics that waited like predators in the shadows. "Daddy," Lily said it while stirring the eggs, her voice casual in a way that meant she had been thinking about it for a while. "That lady at the building, Miss Sterling, do you think she has?" Said Daniel, stopped chopping and considered the question. "Why do you ask?" She looked sad. Under all the angry, she looked sad, like she wanted to cry but forgot how. Daniel thought about Elizabeth Sterling, about the crack in her armor, when Lily spoke her truths, about the way her voice had broken when she mentioned someone dying. He thought about the weight of grief that he recognized because he carried it himself. Maybe she is. "I think some people forget how to show what they are feeling, so it comes out wrong, like when I get mad instead of scared." Exactly like that. Lily nodded, processing this with her usual seriousness. Then she looked up at Daniel with her mother's eyes. "I hope she feels better, even though she was mean, because being sad all the time is really hard." Daniel felt his throat tighten. His daughter, 8 years old, offering compassion to the woman who had just destroyed her father's career. It was so perfectly, Sarah so full of the grace that his wife had possessed, that for a moment he could not speak. "Yeah," he managed finally. "I hope she feels better too." They ate their omelets at the small table by the window, looking out at the city lights, while the sounds of the neighborhood drifted up from below. Sirens in the distance, a dog barking somewhere, the constant hum of traffic that never stopped, even at this hour. After dinner, Daniel helped Lily with her homework, a math worksheet that she had been avoiding. They sat on the couch together, working through fractions and multiplication, the familiar routine, a comfort after the chaos of the day. By 8:30, Lily's eyes were drooping, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion she had been fighting. Bedtime. Daniel carried her to her room, the small space that they had made as cheerful as possible, with secondhand furniture and art projects taped to the walls. He tucked her in and sat on the edge of the bed, watching her settle into her pillow, her eyes already closing. "Daddy, yeah, I'm glad you went back to help those people." Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Me too, even though Ms. Sterling was mean." "Even though." Lily smiled, a sleepy expression that made her look so much like Sarah that Daniel's heart ached. "Okay, good night. Good night, sweetheart." He stayed until her breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep, then rose quietly and left the door slightly ajar. The apartment was silent around him, the kind of silence that amplified every thought, every worry, every fear about the future. He went to the kitchen table and pulled out the bills, spreading them across the surface like evidence of a crime. The rent notice, red letters demanding attention. The utility bills threatening disconnection. The medical debt from Sarah's illness still unpaid after 3 years, despite every extra shift and every sacrifice. $47. That was what he had between himself and catastrophe. $47 and 6 days until rent was due. Daniel stared at the numbers until they blurred, until they stopped meaning anything except the simple truth they represented. He was out of options. He had skills that nobody valued, an experience that nobody wanted, and a reputation that had just been destroyed by one of the most powerful women in New York business. Who would hire him now? Who would take a chance on a 53-year-old maintenance worker who had been fired for insubordination? The answer was nobody, and he knew it. He thought about calling his brother in Ohio, asking for a loan that would never be repaid. He thought about selling the few possessions they had that might bring money, Sarah's jewelry and the old television, and anything else that was not nailed down. He thought about finding a second job, a night shift somewhere, that would let him work after Lily was asleep, burning himself at both ends until there was nothing left. None of it was enough. None of it would ever be enough. The phone rang. Daniel looked at it without recognition for a moment, the device sitting on the counter where he had dropped it hours ago. Then his brain caught up with his senses and he reached for it, checking the screen. Unknown number. He answered anyway because at this point, what did he have to lose, Mr. Shaw? A woman's voice, familiar in a way he could not immediately place. I hope I am not calling too late. It is after 10. Daniel's voice was flat exhausted. Who is this? A pause. Then Elizabeth Sterling. Daniel sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the bills scattering beneath his elbows. He did not know what to say. He had not expected to hear from her again, had assumed their encounter in the lobby was the end of it, a brief moment of near humanity before she returned to her world and he returned to his. I have been watching the security footage from tonight. Elizabeth continued. All of it. The sub-basement, the junction box, the way you talked to your daughter while you worked. Daniel said nothing. You promised her you would come back, and then you did something that could have killed you. Without hesitation. Not for money, not for recognition, just because people needed help. Is there a point to this call, Miss Sterling? Yes, she took a breath, and Daniel could hear the effort it cost her to say what came next. I need someone like you, like me, not as a janitor, not as maintenance, as something else, something I do not even have a name for yet. Daniel looked around his apartment at the bills on the table and the photograph of Sarah and the closed door behind which his daughter was sleeping. He thought about the $47 and the rent due in 6 days and the impossible arithmetic of survival that he had been doing for 3 years. I am listening. There is a problem inside my company, something I cannot see, someone I trusted, someone who has been with me for years. I think they are trying to destroy everything I have built, and I need someone who knows how to look at things, really look. Someone who listens when everyone else is too busy talking. Why me? Because you came back. Her voice softened, became almost vulnerable. When you had every reason to walk away, when I had given you every excuse to let me fail, you came back anyway. That is not something you can fake. That is not something money can buy. Daniel closed his eyes. He thought about the woman who had torn his badge from his chest, who had looked at him like he was less than nothing. He thought about the woman who had stood alone in the lobby and admitted she was wrong, who had spoken about someone dying with grief raw in her voice. They were the same person, two faces of a single complicated truth. There is a coffee shop on 53rd in Lexington. He heard himself saying the words before he had fully decided to say them. Meet me there at noon tomorrow. Come alone. I will be there. He hung up without saying goodbye. Then he sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the bills that surrounded him, thinking about second chances and impossible choices and the strange turns that life could take when you least expected them. Outside, the city continued its eternal hum, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in its countless apartments, and offices, and subway stations. Somewhere a siren wailed, somewhere a baby cried, somewhere someone was being born, and somewhere someone was dying, and somewhere in an apartment above a bodega in Queens, a man who had spent his whole life invisible was wondering if he had finally been seen. Daniel did not sleep that night. He lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, his mind cycling through possibilities and fears, and the strange hope that had taken root despite everything. He thought about Lily and what this might mean for her future. He thought about Sarah and what she would have told him to do. He thought about Elizabeth Sterling and the pain he had glimpsed beneath her armor. Some people look at things, but they do not really see them. Lily had said that to Elizabeth, repeating words that Daniel had spoken without knowing she was listening. It was true. It had always been true. Most people walk through the world seeing only what they expected to see, filtering out everything that did not fit their assumptions or serve their purposes. They looked at janitors and saw uniforms, not human beings. They looked at buildings and saw real estate, not the complex systems that kept them alive. But Daniel had never been able to do that. He had always seen too much noticed, too much paid attention when everyone else was content to ignore. It was what made him good at his job and terrible at office politics, excellent at solving problems, and hopeless at advancing his career. He could not stop seeing the things that others missed any more than he could stop breathing. And now maybe that curse was about to become something else. The night passed slowly, hours stretching into eternities, while Daniel lay awake and wondered what the morning would bring. He heard Lily get up once to use the bathroom, heard her footsteps padding down the hallway and back, heard the creak of her mattress as she settled back into sleep. The sounds of his daughter alive and safe and dreaming of futures that he would do anything to protect. Eventually the sky began to lighten outside his window, gray dawn creeping across the Manhattan skyline. Daniel rose and went to the kitchen, moving quietly so as not to wake Lily. He made coffee and sat at the table watching the city come to life through the small window above the sink. At 7, Lily emerged from her room, still wearing her pajamas, her hair wild from sleep. She looked at Daniel sitting at the table and seemed to understand immediately that something had changed. Did something happen, Ms.? Sterling called last night. Daniel gestured for her to sit down. She wants to meet with me today. Lily processed this information with her usual seriousness. About a job. Maybe. Something like that. Are you going to go? Daniel looked at his daughter at the hope and worry competing in her expression. She had lived through too much instability, already had learned too young that the ground beneath her feet could shift without warning. She deserved security permanence, the kind of childhood that did not include worrying about whether the rent would get paid. Yeah, he said it like a decision because it was one. I think I am, Lily nodded. Okay. She climbed into the chair across from him. Can I have cereal? The morning passed in the familiar rhythms of their routine. Daniel made Lily breakfast and helped her get ready for school, walking her to the bus stop on the corner where she joined the cluster of other children waiting for the yellow bus that would carry them to their separate days. He watched her climb aboard, watched her find a seat by the window and waved to him as the bus pulled away, watched until the vehicle disappeared around the corner and he was alone on the sidewalk with nothing but his thoughts. The coffee shop on 53rd in Lexington was a small establishment wedged between a bank and a dry cleaner, the kind of place that survived on loyal regulars in the strategic deployment of pastries. Daniel arrived 20 minutes early, his military habits asserting themselves despite the civilian setting. He chose a table in the back corner wall behind him, clear line of sight to the entrance. Some reflexes never went away. He ordered coffee and waited. At 11:47, Elizabeth Sterling walked through the door. She looked different than she had at Sterling Tower. Smaller somehow, less certain. She wore jeans and a gray sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No heels, no armor. Just a woman trying very hard not to look like a CEO. She spotted him immediately and crossed the room with quick steps. You are early. So are you. She slid into the chair across from him, her movements uncertain in a way that contrasted sharply with the confident executive he had encountered the day before. Up close, Daniel could see the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands that she tried to hide by putting them in her lap. Thank you for coming. Her voice was softer than he remembered. You are paying for this meeting. That check you sent last night, that is 3 months of rent. Elizabeth blinked. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, checking something on the screen. Her expression shifted to confusion. I did not send a check. It was under my door this morning, an envelope with my name on it, a termination letter from HR Standard Severance, which was insulting, but also a handwritten note in a check for $25,000. That was not me. Elizabeth's confusion appeared genuine. The termination letter would be automatic, but I did not authorize any additional payment. The note said we need to talk. Signed at ES, Elizabeth was silent for a moment, processing this. Then her expression hardened. Patricia, what my executive assistant, Patricia Holloway. She is the only other person who could access that kind of fund without board approval. She must have sent it last night after the crisis was resolved. Why would she do that? Elizabeth looked at Daniel with an expression he could not read. Because she is the one I suspect of betraying me. The words hung in the air between them, shifting the entire nature of their conversation. Daniel sat back in his chair and studied Elizabeth's face, reading the fear and uncertainty beneath her controlled exterior. Start from the beginning. Elizabeth glanced around the coffee shop, checking for listeners. 6 months ago, we began noticing irregularities. Small things at first. Shipments delayed. Research data corrupted. Key employees leaving without explanation. Corporate sabotage. That is what I thought. But then it got personal. She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table, showing him a document filled with financial records. 3 weeks ago, someone sent this to every member of my board. Bank statements linking me to offshore accounts I have never seen. Transfer records for payments I never made. It is all fabricated, but it is good fabrication. Good enough that the board has launched an internal investigation. Daniel looked at the numbers on the screen, his mind processing patterns that most people would miss. Whoever did this knew your systems intimately, knew how to make forgeries that would pass scrutiny, knew which board members would be most suspicious and how to play on their concerns. Exactly. Elizabeth's voice was tight. And there is only one person with that kind of access. One person who knows my schedule, my passwords, my private meetings. One person who has been with me since before I was CEO. Patricia Holloway. Yes. Daniel set the phone down. Tell me about her. Elizabeth's face twisted with something that looked like grief. She has been my executive assistant for 8 years. She was there before my father died, before I took over the company. She held my hand at his funeral. She brought me soup when I forgot to eat for 3 days. She is the closest thing to family I have. But 3 months ago, she started acting different, distant, nervous. She takes calls in private now, leaves early when she never left early before. And last week, I found her in my office at 2 in the morning. She said she was looking for a file, but my computer was open. And I never leave my computer open. Did you confront her? No, Elizabeth shook her head. Because if I am wrong, I destroy the only real relationship I have left. And if I am right, her voice trailed off. If you are right, if I am right, then everything I thought I knew about people is a lie. Daniel understood that fear. The fear of looking at someone you loved and seeing a stranger looking back. He had felt it himself in different contexts throughout a life spent learning that trust was fragile and betrayal was common. Why me? He asked again. You have security teams, lawyers, private investigators. Why bring in a maintenance worker you just fired? Because you see things. Elizabeth leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. You said it yourself yesterday. You listen when nobody else does. You knew exactly what was wrong with my building when a team of engineers could not figure it out. You looked at my daughter and saw that she was scared before I did. She took a breath. I do not need someone who can read spreadsheets. I need someone who can read people. And everyone I have met in the last 10 years has been trying to sell me something, use me for something, take something from me. But you came back to save a building full of people who never knew your name. You did it for nothing. You cannot fake that. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I will not be your weapon. He said it firmly. If I do this, I do it my way. If I find evidence that Patricia is innocent, you will apologize to her. Mean it. And if I find evidence that she is guilty, I will handle it according to my judgment, not yours. Elizabeth studied him, evaluating, weighing costs and benefits with the calculating mind that had built her empire. What do you want in return? Benefits? Daniel did not hesitate. Health insurance? Dental. The kind that covers everything without asking questions. Elizabeth blinked. That is it. My daughter needs braces, and I have not seen a doctor in 6 years because I could not afford the copay. He met her eyes steadily. Fix that and I will help you find your trader. For a long moment, Elizabeth just looked at him. Then slowly she extended her hand across the table. We have a deal, Mr. Shaw. Daniel shook it. Call me Daniel, then call me Elizabeth. She almost smiled. Nobody does anymore. They talked for another hour, Daniel asking questions and Elizabeth answering them with increasing honesty. He learned about her father's death and the vultures who had circled afterward. He learned about her ex-husband, a man who had left when the company was struggling and claimed half of everything in the divorce. He learned about her daughter Grace, 9 years old, and growing up without a mother who had time for her. And he learned about Patricia Holloway. 15 years with the company, 8 of them at Elizabeth's side. Brilliant, dedicated, apparently indispensable. Patricia had been there through every crisis, every triumph, every late night when Elizabeth forgot she had a life outside the office. If Patricia was the traitor, it would be the worst kind of betrayal, The kind that made you question every memory, every moment of trust, every time you had let your guard down. I need access, Daniel said when they finished. Personnel files, security footage, communications records, everything Patricia has touched in the last 6 months. Done. And I need you to act normal. Go to your meetings, smile at Patricia, pretend nothing has changed. Elizabeth's face tightened. I do not know if I can do that. You can, Daniel's voice was firm. You have been doing it your whole life. That armor you wear every day that is acting. This is just another role. A harder one, but you are capable. She looked at him with something that might have been respect, might have been surprise. Then she nodded. When do you start now? Daniel stood. First thing I need is a badge that lets me move through the building without being questioned. Second thing I need is a reason to be there that nobody will think twice about. Elizabeth considered this. I could hire you as a consultant. Security assessment. Nobody questions consultants, and it would give you legitimate access to every part of the building. Good. Daniel pulled out his phone and checked the time. I will need a few days to get set up, arrange childcare for my daughter. Monday work for you. Monday works. They walked out of the coffee shop together, emerging into the midday bustle of Manhattan. The streets were crowded with lunch-hour pedestrians, people hurrying between destinations that seemed infinitely more important than wherever they actually were. Daniel felt himself slipping into the flow, becoming invisible again, just another face in the crowd. Daniel, he turned. Elizabeth stood on the sidewalk, looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it. Tried again. Thank you. Just that. Thank you. Daniel nodded. Do not thank me yet. I have not found anything. I am not thanking you for that. She hesitated. I am thanking you for coming back, when you had every reason not to. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as thoroughly as if she had never been there. Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, processing everything that had just happened. 24 hours ago, he had been a maintenance worker with no future and no hope. Now he was a consultant with health insurance and a mission to find a traitor in one of the largest corporations in New York. The reversal was so complete that it felt unreal, like something that happened to other people in movies or novels, not to 53-year-old widowers with bad knees and empty bank accounts. But it was real. The check in his pocket was real. The deal he had just made was real. The look in Elizabeth Sterling's eyes when she thanked him, that had been real too. He started walking toward the subway, his mind already working on the problem ahead. Patricia Holloway was smart, experienced, and had 8 years to build whatever scheme she was running. She would have covered her tracks, hidden her communications, created alibis for anything suspicious. Finding evidence against her would require patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see patterns that most people missed. It was exactly the kind of problem Daniel was built to solve. The subway was crowded with afternoon commuters, and Daniel found himself pressed against strangers in the peculiar intimacy of public transportation. He used the time to think, letting his mind wander through the information Elizabeth had given him, looking for threads he could pull. Patricia had been acting different for 3 months. That meant something had changed, some event or offer or threat that had shifted her behavior. Daniel needed to find out what that was. He needed to trace her movements, her contacts, her financial history. He needed to understand her motivations, because nobody betrayed someone they had worked with for 8 years without a reason. The subway stopped at his station, and Daniel climbed the stairs to street level, emerging into the familiar neighborhood that had been his home for the past 5 years. The bodega on the corner, the laundromat with the broken sign, the apartment building with its perpetually malfunctioning elevator. He knew every crack in these sidewalks, every face in these storefronts, every rhythm of this particular corner of the city. Lily would be at the after-school program for another hour, enough time for Daniel to start making arrangements. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had not used in months. The voice that answered was gruff, suspicious. Who is this, Danny? It is Daniel Shaw, from the VA. A pause, then recognition. Danny boy, how the hell are you? I heard you got into some trouble. News traveled fast in veteran circles. Daniel was not surprised that word of his firing had already spread. I am okay. Actually, I am better than okay. I have a job, but I need help with something. He explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out the details about Elizabeth and Patricia, focusing on the practical problem of childcare. His old friend listened without interrupting, then let out a low whistle. So you need someone to pick up Lily after school. Watch her until you get home. Yeah, and I cannot pay much right now, but that is going to change. Can you help Danny? You know I owe you. That thing with my brother, you saved his life. I just drove him to the hospital at 3 in the morning in a snowstorm without asking questions. His friend's voice was firm. I will pick up your girl tomorrow, and you can pay me back whenever you can, however you can. No rush, no pressure. Daniel felt some of the tension ease from his shoulders. Thank you, Mike. I mean it. Just do me a favor. Whatever trouble you are getting into, be careful. I have seen too many good men go down because they thought they could handle more than they could. I will be careful. He hung up and continued walking, his mind ticking through the other items on his list. He needed to tell Lily what was happening. He needed to review the materials Elizabeth would be sending him. He needed to prepare himself mentally for the challenge ahead. But first, he needed to go home and sit with his daughter and remind himself why any of this mattered. The apartment was quiet when he entered Lily, not yet back from her program. Daniel moved through the familiar space, picking up the detritus of their morning, starting a load of laundry, doing the small tasks that kept their life functioning. The routine was soothing, grounding, a reminder that some things stayed constant even when everything else changed. His phone buzzed with a text message. Elizabeth, sending files now. Security badge will be ready Monday. Let me know if you need anything else. Daniel typed a response. Understood. Obedida. We'll review tonight. He set the phone down and looked around his apartment. The same cluttered space, it had always been, the same photograph of Sarah smiling from the bookshelf, the same pile of bills on the table. But something felt different. Something had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, Daniel Shaw had a purpose beyond survival. He had a problem to solve, a mission to complete, a reason to use the skills he had spent a lifetime developing. Elizabeth Sterling had given him that, whether she intended to or not. She had looked at a man everyone else overlooked and seen something worth saving. Some people look at things, but they do not really see them. But Daniel saw, he had always seen, and now finally someone was asking him to use that gift for something that mattered. The door opened and Lily burst in with her usual after-school energy. Daddy, you are home early. I am. He caught her in a hug, feeling her small arms wrap around him. I have news. She pulled back and looked at him, reading his expression the way she always did. Good news. Good news. He guided her to the couch and sat down beside her. I have a new job. Different from before. I am going to be helping someone figure out a problem. Like fixing things, sort of. More like finding things. Finding out the truth about something that someone is trying to hide. Lily considered this with her usual seriousness. Like a detective, something like that. That sounds cool. Her face brightened. Will you still pick me up from school? Not every day. Daniel touched her cheek. But I have a friend who is going to help, Mr. Mike. You remember him from the VA picnic, the one with the big dog? That is him. He is going to pick you up some days when I have to work late. But I will always come home, Lily. I promise you that. No matter what happens, I will always come home. She looked at him with eyes that saw too much. Because of what Mom said about staying visible. Daniel felt his throat tighten. Yeah, because of what Mom said. Lily nodded, accepting this. Then she climbed into his lap and rested her head against his chest. I am glad you have a new job, Daddy. You were sad before. I know. Are you still sad? Daniel thought about the question. He was still grieving Sarah. He was still struggling with the weight of single parenthood. He was still carrying the scars of a war that had ended years ago but never really stopped. But beneath all of that, something new was growing. Hope, maybe, or purpose, or just the simple knowledge that he still had something to offer the world. A little sad, he admitted, but also a little excited. I think good things might be coming. Me too. Lily snuggled closer. I have a feeling. They sat together as the afternoon light faded outside the window. Father and daughter in the small apartment they called home. The city hummed around them, indifferent to their existence, but inside these walls they had each other. They had survived losing Sarah. They had survived poverty and uncertainty and all the hard years since. They would survive whatever came next, because that was what the Shaw family did. They survived. Adapted. They kept going even when the world gave them every reason to stop. And sometimes when they were very lucky, they found people who saw them for who they really were. Daniel held his daughter and watched the sky darken outside, thinking about Elizabeth Sterling and Patricia Holloway and the investigation that would begin in a few days. He did not know what he would find. He did not know if he was walking into something he could not handle. But he knew he had to try. Because some people looked at things but did not really see them. But Daniel Shaw was not one of those people. He had never been one of those people. And maybe finally that was going to matter. The first week Daniel watched, Elizabeth had given him credentials that opened every door in the Sterling Tower, a consultant's badge that asked no questions and invited none. He moved through the building like smoke present but unremarkable, another face in the endless procession of specialists and contractors who drifted through corporate spaces without leaving traces. The security guards nodded when he passed but did not stop him. The administrative staff glanced up from their screens and then away, filing him in the category of people who did not require attention. It was exactly what he needed. Patricia Holloway occupied a desk outside Elizabeth's office on the 42nd floor, a position that gave her perfect visibility over everyone who came and went from the executive suite. She was 51 years old according to her personnel file, though she looked younger with silver-streaked hair, cut in a practical style, and eyes that missed nothing. Daniel observed her from various vantage points throughout the building, cataloging her routines, her interactions, her small habits that most people would never notice. She arrived at 7:30 every morning, an hour before Elizabeth. She left at 7 in the evening, sometimes later. She ate lunch at her desk while reviewing documents, a salad from the same deli every day, dressing on the side. She spoke to everyone with professional warmth, remembering names and birthdays, and the small details that made people feel seen. She was by all appearances exactly what a perfect executive assistant should be. But Daniel saw the cracks. On the third day, he noticed the way her eyes tracked Elizabeth's movements across a room, not with loyalty or admiration, but with something colder. Calculation, assessment, the gaze of someone measuring distance and timing, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her smile never quite reached her eyes when she thought no one was watching. She positioned herself between Elizabeth and every door, every exit, every potential escape route. He had seen that behavior before in soldiers who were planning something and waiting for the perfect opportunity. Patricia Holloway was not a faithful assistant protecting her boss. She was a predator studying her prey. On Friday, he followed her. Patricia left the office at 6:47 in the evening, earlier than usual. Daniel tracked her through the lobby and out onto the street, maintaining a careful distance that would not attract attention. She walked 3 blocks to a parking garage on 45th Street, retrieved a silver BMW that definitely exceeded her salary range, and drove north through Manhattan traffic. Daniel hailed a cab and followed. The BMW crossed into the Upper East Side and parked outside a brownstone on 73rd Street. The building was old money pre-war architecture, the kind of address that announced wealth without trying too hard. Daniel watched from across the street as Patricia climbed the steps and disappeared inside. 20 minutes later, she emerged with a man. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than Daniel's annual salary. His watch caught the street light as he gestured a Patek Philippe that probably had a waiting list measured in years. Daniel took photographs with his phone, capturing the man's face from multiple angles, documenting the conversation that lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Patricia handed him a USB drive. He handed her an envelope. Then they separated, walking in opposite directions, like strangers who had never met. Daniel stayed in the shadows until both were gone. Then he pulled out his phone and started running facial recognition through the databases he still had access to from his military days. The results came back within the hour, confirming what he had already suspected. Richard Caldwell, Executive Vice President of Hartley Wells Corporation, Elizabeth's primary competitor, and the man who had tried to buy her company the previous year. Patricia Holloway was not just stealing information. She was selling it to the enemy. That night, Daniel showed Elizabeth the photographs. They sat in her home office, a converted bedroom in her penthouse that felt more like a bunker than a workspace. Elizabeth stared at the images without speaking, her face cycling through emotions too fast to catalog. Shock, denial, grief, and finally the cold fury of someone who had been betrayed by a person they loved. Richard Caldwell. Her voice was hollow. He gave the eulogy at my father's funeral. He held my hand and told me everything would be okay. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. Elizabeth's eyes hardened. Tell me everything you found. Daniel walked her through it methodically, the pattern of Patricia's movements over the past week, the financial irregularities he had uncovered in her expense reports, the burner phone she used for communications that never touched the company network, the timing of her meetings with Caldwell, which correlated precisely with the leaks that had been plaguing Sterling Corporation for months. She has been doing this for at least 6 months. Daniel concluded, possibly longer. The fabricated financial records, the board investigation, the delayed shipments, and corrupted data. It all traces back to her. Why Daniel hesitated. He had theories, but theories were not facts. She feels overlooked, undervalued. According to her personnel file, she has been with the company for 15 years. She was here before you took over, working her way up from the secretarial pool. When your father died, she probably thought she had finally earned recognition, maybe even a seat at the table. And instead I came back. Instead you came back. Younger, more connected, with a name that opened doors hers never could. You took the position she believed she had earned. Elizabeth's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the desk to hide it. I never knew she felt that way. She never said anything. People rarely do, not until it is too late. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that could not be undone. Elizabeth's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Daniel watched her rebuild her composure brick by brick, the CEO reassembling herself from the wreckage of personal betrayal. What do we do now? We gather more evidence. Daniel kept his voice steady. What I have is enough to know she is guilty, but not enough to prove it in court. We need her communications with Caldwell. We need documentation of what she has been passing to Hartley Wells. We need to understand the full scope of the conspiracy before we move. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. I need to access her personal devices, track her movements, build a case that will hold up under scrutiny. Elizabeth nodded slowly. And in the meantime, you act normal. Go to your meetings, smile at Patricia, pretend nothing has changed. I do not know if I can look at her without seeing this. You can. Daniel leaned forward. You have been wearing armor your whole life. This is just one more day of keeping it on. Something shifted in Elizabeth's expression, a crack in the wall she had built around herself. She looked at Daniel not as an employee or a consultant, but as something else entirely. Someone who understood what it meant to carry weight that no one else could see. How do you do it? Her voice was soft. How do you keep going when everything you believe turns out to be a lie? Daniel thought about Sarah. About the moment when he realized she was really dying, when the denial he had been clinging to finally crumbled and left him standing in the ruins of his old life. You find something worth protecting, someone who needs you to keep standing, and you focus on that instead of the pain. Elizabeth's gaze drifted to a photograph on her desk, a little girl with dark hair and serious eyes frozen in a moment of rare laughter. Grace. Yeah. Daniel followed her gaze. Grace. The second week brought unexpected complications. It started with a phone call from Lily's school, Mrs. Patterson's voice was apologetic but firm. There had been an incident during recess. Nothing serious, but Lily had gotten into an argument with another student, and the principal wanted Daniel to come in for a conference. He arrived at the school feeling the familiar weight of parental guilt. The meeting was brief and ultimately reassuring. Lily had defended a younger student from bullies using words instead of fists, but words sharp enough to earn a warning from the administration. Daniel listened to the principal's concerns and promised to talk with his daughter while feeling a quiet pride that he kept carefully hidden. Afterward, he found Lily waiting outside the office, her backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. Am I in trouble? Daniel knelt to her level. Tell me what happened. There was a boy, Tommy Reeves. He was being mean to a first grader, calling her names because her mom cleans offices at night. Lily's jaw set with familiar stubbornness. I told him that people who work hard deserve respect no matter what job they have. And I told him that his dad probably has someone like her mom keeping his office clean, and he should be grateful instead of mean. Daniel felt his heart swell. And what did Tommy say? He said some things about our family, about how we are poor and how you got fired. Her eyes dropped. I said some things back. What kind of things? Lily hesitated. I told him that my dad is braver than his dad will ever be, that you went to war and saved people's lives, and that you saved a whole building full of people last week while his dad was probably just sitting in a meeting talking about numbers. Daniel pulled his daughter into a hug, holding her tight against the complicated feelings churning in his chest. pride and concern and the ache of knowing that she had been fighting battles on his behalf. You were right to defend that little girl. He spoke into her hair. But we need to talk about how we handle people who say hurtful things. Sometimes the best response is not responding at all. That is what Mom used to say. Your mother was smart about people. Lily pulled back and looked at him with those eyes that saw too much. Is it true what Tommy said? Are we poor? Daniel considered lying, considered softening the truth the way parents were supposed to do, but Lily had never responded well to being protected from reality. She was too much like Sarah for that. We do not have a lot of money right now, but that is changing. I have a new job, remember. Things are going to get better. Because of the lady Miss Sterling, yes. Because of her, Lily nodded, accepting this with her usual seriousness. She seemed nice when she was not being mean. People are complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes the same person can be both. They walked home together, Lily's hand in his, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Daniel thought about the parallel tracks his life had suddenly started running on. The investigation into Patricia Holloway. The unexpected relationship forming with Elizabeth Sterling. The daily challenges of raising a daughter alone in a city that ate the unprepared alive. Everything was connected, tangled together in ways he was only beginning to understand. The complication deepened 2 days later. Daniel was at Sterling Tower, reviewing security footage in a small office Elizabeth had requisitioned for his use when his phone buzzed with a text message. Emergency. Grace's nanny quit. I am stuck in board meeting for 3 more hours. Can you help? He stared at the message, parsing the implications. Elizabeth Sterling was asking him to pick up her daughter from school, to care for a child he had never met based on nothing more than a few days of working together and a shared experience of crisis. He typed back, address. The response came immediately, followed by a second message. Thank you. I will make it up to you. Grace Sterling was waiting outside her private school in the Upper East Side, a small figure in a uniform that cost more than Daniel's weekly grocery budget. She had Elizabeth's dark hair and serious eyes, but there was something softer in her face, something that had not yet learned to harden against the world. You are the man from the building. Grace said it as a statement, not a question. The one who fixed the lights. That is me. Daniel held out his hand. Your mom asked me to pick you up. I know. She texted me. Grace studied his hand for a moment before shaking it. Her grip was formal, practiced the handshake of a child who had been taught corporate etiquette before she learned to ride a bicycle. Where is your daughter? At her school. Daniel guided Grace toward the car he had borrowed from Mike for the occasion. A friend is picking her up today. Grace climbed into the back seat and buckled herself in with the ease of someone who had spent a lot of time in cars. Is your daughter nice? I think so. But I might be biased. What does biased mean? It means I love her, so I might not see her clearly. Grace considered this. My mom says she is not biased about me. She says she sees me clearly and still thinks I am wonderful. That sounds like something a mom would say. Grace smiled, and for a moment she looked less like a miniature executive and more like an actual 9-year-old. The drive to Sterling Tower took longer than expected, Manhattan traffic snarling into its usual afternoon chaos. Daniel used the time to learn about Grace, asking questions that drew out her personality in surprising ways. She liked books, especially stories about adventurers and explorers. She hated math but was good at it anyway. She wanted a dog, but her mother said their apartment was not suitable for pets. Do you have a dog? Grace asked. Not yet. Daniel navigated through a yellow light. But my daughter wants one too. Maybe someday. Maybe you could share a dog. Get one together. Maybe we could. The idea was absurd, of course. The Shaw family and the Sterling family sharing a pet like they were some kind of blended unit. But Grace's suggestion lingered in Daniel's mind, planting seeds he did not examine too closely. When they arrived at Sterling Tower, Lily was already there. Mike had dropped her off 20 minutes earlier, leaving her in Daniel's makeshift office with a stack of homework and strict instructions not to touch anything important. She looked up when Daniel entered with Grace, her eyes widening at the sight of the unfamiliar girl. Lily, this is Grace. Her mom is the one I am working for now. The two girls studied each other with the careful assessment that children brought to new acquaintances. Then Grace spotted the drawings scattered across Lily's workspace, crayon illustrations of dragons and castles and fierce-looking cats. You draw sometimes, Lily's voice was cautious. When I am bored. Can I see Lily hesitated, then nodded. Grace crossed the room and sat down beside her, examining each drawing with genuine interest. Within minutes, they were deep in conversation about the relative merits of different mythical creatures and whether flying was better than breathing fire. Daniel watched from the doorway, something warm spreading through his chest. She never does that. Elizabeth's voice came from behind him, soft with wonder. Grace never opens up to strangers. Daniel turned. Elizabeth stood in the hallway, still wearing her business suit from the board meeting, but her expression had lost its usual sharpness. She was watching her daughter laugh at something Lily had said, and her eyes held an emotion Daniel recognized from his own reflection. Maybe they needed each other. He said it without thinking too hard about the implications. Maybe. Elizabeth moved to stand beside him close enough that he could smell her perfume. Thank you for doing this. You asked. I came. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple. She looked at him, then really looked the way she had in her office after he showed her the photographs of Patricia. You are becoming important to us. To both of us. I hope you know that. Daniel did not know what to say, so he said nothing, just stood beside her and watched their daughters discover each other in the fading afternoon light. Dinner became a regular thing after that. What started as emergency childcare evolved into scheduled visits, then shared meals, then something that looked increasingly like routine. Elizabeth would order food to her office when meetings ran late, and Daniel would bring the girls up from his workspace to eat together. They would sit around the conference table, Grace and Lily arguing about homework, while Daniel and Elizabeth discussed the investigation in careful code. It was not a family. Daniel was careful not to use that word even in his own thoughts. But it was something adjacent to family, something with similar warmth and similar complications. During the third week, the investigation took a darker turn. Daniel was alone in his office reviewing Patricia's phone records when his own phone rang. Unknown number. He almost did not answer, but instinct made him reconsider. His instincts had been keeping him alive for decades. Mr. Shaw. The voice was female, cold, unfamiliar. I think we should talk. Who is this? Someone who knows what you are looking for, and someone who can give it to you, for a price. Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. I am listening. Patricia Holloway is a means to an end. She is not the mastermind. She is the puppet. And the person pulling her strings is much closer to Elizabeth than you think. Then tell me who. Meet me tomorrow night, 9 p.m., the old warehouse on Pier 47. Come alone. I will give you everything you need. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone, processing what had just happened. Every instinct screamed trap. The isolated location, the anonymous caller, the promise of easy answers. It was textbook manipulation, the kind of setup that got people killed in places far less civilized than Manhattan. But if there was even a chance she was telling the truth. He went to Elizabeth's office and told her about the call. Absolutely not. Her response was immediate. You cannot go alone. It is too dangerous. I am not asking permission. Daniel, please. Elizabeth moved closer, her face tight with fear. If something happens to you, Lily loses her father. Grace loses. She stopped, unable to finish the thought. Grace loses what Elizabeth's eyes were bright with emotion. She loses the only person who has made her smile in months. And I lose the only person who has ever seen me. Really seen me. Daniel felt something shift between them, some invisible barrier crumbling. He reached out and took her hand, the gesture more intimate than any they had shared before. I will be careful. I promise. That is not good enough. It is all I have. Elizabeth looked at their joined hands, then back at his face. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. Come back. Her voice was barely a whisper. Whatever happens, come back. I will. Daniel squeezed her fingers. That is a promise I do not break. The night before the meeting, Daniel sat on Lily's bed and watched her sleep. She looked so peaceful, so unaware of the dangers circling around them. He had spent his whole life trying to protect her from the darkness in the world. And now he was about to walk straight into it. Daddy, her voice was sleepy, confused. You are still here, just thinking. He brushed hair from her forehead. Go back to sleep. What are you thinking about? Daniel considered his answer. About how much I love you, about how there is nothing in this world I would not do to keep you safe. Lily reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were so small, so trusting. I know, Daddy. She smiled sleepily. You always come back. You promised. I did. And you do not break promises. No, Daniel leaned down and kissed her forehead. I do not. He stayed until her breathing deepened into true sleep. Then he rose quietly and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that stretched to the horizon. Tomorrow he would walk into the unknown. Tonight he would hold on to what mattered. Pier 47 smelled like rust and salt water and bad decisions. Daniel arrived at 8:43 early as always. He walked the perimeter twice, checking exits, counting shadows, listening to the silence that pressed against his ears. The warehouse was old, abandoned for years, based on the broken windows and graffiti covering its walls. At 8:56, headlights swept across the lot. A black sedan pulled up expensive tinted windows. The door opened and a woman stepped out. Mid-40s, sharp features, gray blazer over black slacks. She moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to control. Mr. Shaw, thank you for coming. You have a name. Call me Miranda. Daniel studied her face. No nervousness, no fear. She was not a messenger. She was a player. Talk. Miranda smiled. Patricia Holloway has been feeding information to Hartley Wells for 3 years, but she is not doing it for money. She is doing it because someone promised her something she wanted more than cash. What Elizabeth's job? Patricia believes she deserves to be CEO. She was there before Elizabeth. She did the work, made the sacrifices. And then Elizabeth came back younger and prettier and better connected and took everything Patricia had been building toward. So this is revenge. This is justice. At least that is how Patricia sees it. Miranda stepped closer. But here is what Patricia does not know. The people she is working with do not plan to make her CEO. They plan to destroy Sterling Corporation completely. And once the company falls, Patricia becomes a liability. Daniel processed this. You are saying she is being used. I am saying everyone is being played, including you. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Daniel felt his instincts sharpening, the same instincts that had kept him alive through 4 tours in Afghanistan. What do you mean? Miranda tilted her head. You think Elizabeth Sterling hired you because you are good at reading people. She hired you because you are disposable. A janitor with no connections, no power, no one who would miss you if you disappeared. The perfect fall guy. All. Daniel did not flinch. Keep talking. When this is over, when Patricia is exposed and Hartley Wells backs off, Elizabeth will need someone to blame for how long it took. Someone who missed the signs. Someone who failed to protect her. Miranda's smile widened. Who do you think that will be? You do not know her. I know women like her. They use people, Daniel. They chew them up and spit them out. And they never take responsibility for their own failures. The wind off the water was cold, cutting through his jacket. Daniel listened to Miranda's words and searched for the truth hidden among the lies. Why are you telling me this? Because I was Patricia once. Loyal, devoted, willing to do anything for someone who did not deserve it. Miranda's voice softened. And when I finally opened my eyes, it was almost too late. She held out a USB drive, FYM. This contains everything, bank records, communications, the full paper trail linking Patricia to Hartley Wells. Daniel did not take it. Who sent you? Miranda's expression flickered. Just for a second, but Daniel caught it. I told you I am someone who knows what you are looking for. That is not what I asked. He stepped back. Who sent you? Silence. And then from somewhere behind the warehouse, footsteps. Multiple. Heavy. Moving fast. Daniel ran. He did not wait to see who was coming. Instinct took over, the same instinct that had saved his life a dozen times in combat zones. He cut left away from the footsteps toward the chain-link fence at the edge of the lot. Stop him! Miranda's voice rang out behind him. More footsteps. Closer now. At least 3 men, maybe 4. Daniel hit the fence and climbed. His bad knee screamed in protest. He ignored it. Adrenaline was the best painkiller he knew. He dropped to the other side and kept running. 3 blocks later, he ducked into an alley and pressed himself against the wall, breathing hard. His phone buzzed. Elizabeth. Daniel. Where are you? I have been trying to reach you for an hour. I am fine. He was gasping. Change of plans. The meeting was a setup. What they tried to grab me, I got away. But listen to me. Whatever is happening, it is bigger than Patricia. There are people involved we do not know about yet. Where are you? Does not matter. What matters is Grace. Where is she right now? Home with the security team. Why keep her there? Do not let her go anywhere. Do not let anyone you do not trust within 100 feet of her. Daniel, you are scaring me. Good, you should be scared. He took a breath. I will be there in 20 minutes. Do not move until I get there. He hung up and started running again. When he reached Elizabeth's penthouse, she was waiting by the door. What happened? Daniel told her everything. Miranda, the USB drive, the ambush, the warning about being disposable. Elizabeth's face went pale. She said I was using you. She said a lot of things. Most of it was designed to turn me against you, but you are not sure. Daniel looked at her, really looked, at the fear in her eyes, at the way her hands trembled as she reached for him, at the vulnerability she was letting him see for the first time. I am sure. He took her hands in his, because you came to me when you did not have to, because you let your daughter play with mine, because you asked me to stay for dinner. People who use others do not do those things. Elizabeth's eyes glistened. I do not know how to be anything other than what I am. You do not have to be anything else. Daniel squeezed her fingers. Right now we focus. Someone set that trap tonight. Someone who knew I was investigating. Someone who wanted to scare me off or grab me, who I do not know yet. But I am going to find out. Elizabeth looked at him with eyes that wanted to believe but did not know how. Promise me. Her voice was barely audible. Promise me you will be careful. Daniel stepped closer, close enough to feel her breath on his face. I promise. He said it like a vow. I am not going anywhere. And in that moment, standing in her apartment, with the city lights glittering beyond the windows, something changed between them. Something that could not be unnamed or taken back. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Daniel took his position in the security center at 1:47, settling into a chair before 3 monitors that displayed feeds from every camera in Sterling Tower. He had spent the previous night mapping sight lines and escape routes, memorizing the layout of the executive floor until he could navigate it blindfolded. Preparation was the difference between survival and disaster. He had learned that lesson in places far more dangerous than corporate boardrooms. Elizabeth sat at the conference table on the central monitor, reviewing notes with the practiced composure of someone who had spent her entire adult life performing under pressure. She wore a navy suit that cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, her hair pulled back in the severe style she favored for important meetings. To anyone watching, she looked calm, confident, every inch the CEO who had built an empire from the ashes of her father's death. Only Daniel knew about the tremor in her hands that morning, the way she had gripped her coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The whispered conversation they had shared before she left for the office, promises exchanged in voices too low for anyone else to hear. Patricia Holloway sat 3 chairs to Elizabeth's left, tablet, open stylus ready. The perfect assistant prepared for anything, radiating the competence that had made her indispensable for 15 years. Daniel watched her face on the monitor, searching for cracks in the facade for any sign that she knew the trap closing around her. At 2:03, the meeting began. Elizabeth presented quarterly projections with the fluency of someone who had done this 100 times before. Revenue was up 7%. Market share was expanding in key demographics. The Hartley Wells situation had been contained, the deal restructured to minimize exposure to future complications. Everything looked perfect on paper. Daniel kept his eyes on Patricia. At 2:17, Elizabeth's phone buzzed with a prearranged signal. She glanced at it, her expression unchanging, then excused herself from the table to take an imaginary call. The moment she left the room, Patricia's fingers began moving across her tablet with new urgency. Daniel watched her type something, save it, then stand. I need to use the restroom. Patricia announced it to no one in particular, already moving toward the door. She turned left in the hallway, heading not toward the restrooms, but toward Elizabeth's private office. Daniel was already moving, his body responding, before his mind had finished calculating distances and angles. He took the service corridor that ran parallel to the executive suite, emerging into the hallway just as Patricia reached for the door handle. Patricia. She froze. Her hand hovered over the handle for a fraction of a second before she turned, her face arranging itself into an expression of innocent confusion. Mr. Shaw, I was just looking for a file that Elizabeth asked me to retrieve earlier. What file? Quarterly reports. For the presentation. Daniel moved closer, positioning himself between Patricia and the door. The quarterly reports are in the boardroom. I watched you pull them up on your tablet 10 minutes ago. The mask slipped, just for a moment, just long enough for Daniel to see the calculation behind her eyes the rapid assessment of options and outcomes. Then she recovered, smoothing her features back into professional neutrality. I do not know what you are implying. I am not implying anything. Daniel kept his voice level. I am telling you that I know. About Richard Caldwell, about the offshore accounts, about the USB drive you have been using to copy Elizabeth's files. Patricia's face drained of color. The professional mask crumbled, replaced by something raw and desperate and utterly human. You do not understand, her voice cracked. You do not understand what she did to me. Then explain it. I gave her everything. The words burst out like water through a broken dam. 15 years I built this company. I was here when it was nothing. When her father was running it into the ground with his gambling and his bad investments, and his refusal to listen to anyone who actually knew what they were doing. I saved it. I made it profitable. And when he died, when I finally thought I would get the recognition I deserved, you thought you would take over. I deserved to take over. Patricia's voice rose, years of suppressed rage finally finding release. But then she came back, his precious daughter, the one who had been off playing socialite in Europe while I was working 18-hour days. And suddenly I was invisible again. A secretary, an assistant, someone to fetch coffee and manage calendars while she took credit for everything I built. Daniel watched her unravel, recognizing the pain beneath the fury. He had felt something similar himself, the bitter ache of being overlooked, of working harder than anyone else, and watching others claim the rewards. But understanding was not the same as excusing. So you sold her out. I took what I was owed. Patricia's eyes blazed. Richard promised me. Once Elizabeth was gone, once the board saw the financial irregularities and the offshore accounts and all the evidence of her incompetence, they would need someone to rebuild the company. Someone who actually knew what they were doing. Richard lied to you. Daniel kept his voice calm despite the tension coiling in his muscles. He does not want you to be CEO. He wants Sterling Corporation destroyed. And once that happens, you become a problem. A witness. Someone who knows too much. That is not true. I have the evidence. Bank records, communications, the entire paper trail showing that Hartley Wells never intended to put you in charge of anything. They were going to let you take the fall for the sabotage, then acquire the wreckage for pennies on the dollar. Patricia's face contorted disbelief, warring with the dawning horror of someone realizing they had been played. You are lying. You are trying to trick me. I am trying to save you. Daniel took a step forward. The same step he had taken 100 times in Afghanistan, approaching frightened people who held weapons and did not know what to do with them. You made mistakes. Bad ones. But you can still do the right thing. Help us take down Richard. Tell the truth about what happened. The truth does not matter. Patricia's voice had gone hollow. It never mattered. No one ever listened. No one ever saw. I see you, Patricia. Daniel spoke softly now, the way he had learned to speak to people on the edge. I see a woman who worked her whole life for something and never got the recognition she deserved. I see someone who made a terrible choice because she was hurt and angry and alone. Patricia's hand moved toward her purse. The gesture was small, almost unconscious, but Daniel caught it. Do not. The gun appeared before he finished the word, small silver trembling in her grip. Patricia raised it with hands that shook so badly the barrel wavered like a compass needle, searching for north. Stay back. Her voice was barely a whisper. I cannot go to prison. I will not. Put the gun down. You do not understand. Tears streamed down her face. I have nothing left. Everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed, it is all gone. Elizabeth took it. Richard used me, and now you are going to take away whatever is left. Daniel did not move, did not reach for her, just stood there, steady and present, letting the silence do what words could not. Is this how you want it to end? He asked it gently. Is this the legacy you want to leave? What legacy? Patricia laughed, a broken sound that held no humor. I do not have children. I do not have family. I gave everything to this company, and it gave me nothing in return. Then build something new. Daniel took another small step. It is not too late. You have skills, experience, knowledge that took decades to acquire. You can start over. People do it every day. Not at my age, not with my record. I am 53 years old. Daniel's voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. 3 years ago, I was sleeping in my car eating at food banks, wondering if I would ever be able to provide for my daughter. And now I am standing here offering you the same chance someone offered me. The chance to be seen, to matter, to build something worth building. Patricia stared at him, the gun still raised but no longer quite pointed at his chest. Why would you help me after everything I did? Because I know what it feels like to be invisible. Daniel held her gaze. I know what it feels like to give everything you have and watch other people take the credit. And I know that the answer is not destruction. The answer is finding people who see you for who you really are. The gun wavered. Patricia's shoulders began to shake with sobs she could no longer suppress. I just wanted to matter. The words came out in fragments. I just wanted someone to notice. I notice. Daniel extended his hand, palm up, non-threatening. Elizabeth notices now, too. She told me last night that she never knew how much you had done for this company, that she wishes she had seen it sooner. She said a lot of things, including that she failed you, that she was so focused on proving herself that she forgot to see the people around her. Patricia looked at his outstretched hand, then at the gun in her own, then back at his face, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. She found none. Slowly, like someone releasing a breath held too long, Patricia lowered the gun. Daniel stepped forward and took it from her, easing it from fingers that had lost all their strength. Then he caught her as she collapsed against him, her body racked with sobs. I am sorry. She kept saying it over and over. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I know. Daniel held her the way he would hold Lily after a nightmare. I know. The check, Daniel said as he steadied her. The $25,000 you sent me. Why? Patricia wiped her eyes, her voice ragged. I needed to know if you could be bought. Everyone has a price. I thought if you took the money and vanished, you were just another problem I could solve with cash. But I came back. You came back. Her voice cracked. And that scared me more than anything. Because it meant Elizabeth had found someone who actually cared. Someone I could not control. Federal agents arrived 20 minutes later. Daniel had made calls while Patricia sat in a chair staring at nothing, all the fight drained out of her. The agents were professional, almost gentle, following Daniel's lead as they took her into custody. Patricia did not resist. She walked between them with empty eyes and slumped shoulders, a woman who had finally stopped running. Elizabeth watched from the doorway of her office, her face unreadable. Is she going to be okay? Daniel moved to stand beside her, eventually. She has a lot to answer for, but I think the prosecutor will take her cooperation into account. And Richard arrested an hour ago. Elizabeth pulled out her phone and showed him the news alert. The evidence you gathered was enough for multiple indictments. What about the woman at the warehouse? Daniel asked. Miranda, Elizabeth checked her phone again. Arrested at JFK 2 hours ago. Fake passport, one-way ticket to Dubai. Turns out she has been Caldwell's cleanup specialist for a decade. The FBI is very interested in talking to her. Daniel looked at the headline, feeling the peculiar emptiness that always followed the end of a mission. The adrenaline fading, the purpose dissolving, the question of what came next suddenly looming. What happens now? Elizabeth turned to face him. The CEO mask was gone, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. Something that looked like hope. Now we rebuild. Clean and transparent and honest. The way it should have been from the beginning. And us, the question hung between them, heavy with implications neither had been willing to voice until now. Elizabeth reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, steady, certain. I do not know what this is. She spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. I do not know how to define it or where it is going, but I know that you are the first person in years who has seen me for who I really am. Not the CEO, not the fortune, just me. Daniel squeezed her hand. I feel the same way. So we figure it out together. It was not a declaration of love. It was something more honest than that. An acknowledgement that two broken people had found something worth protecting in each other and a commitment to see where that protection might lead. 6 months later, Elizabeth resigned as CEO of Sterling Corporation. The announcement shocked the business world. Headlines screamed about unexpected departures and corporate shakeups, and speculation about what had driven one of the youngest female CEOs in Fortune 500 history to walk away from everything she had built. The truth was simpler and more complicated than any headline could capture. I need to explain something. Elizabeth said it the night before the announcement, sitting on the porch of the house they had found together in Westchester. The house had 4 bedrooms, a yard big enough for a dog, and a kitchen where Daniel cooked Sunday dinners while the girls did homework at the table. I am listening. When I took over Sterling Corporation, I did it because I thought I had something to prove. Elizabeth's gaze drifted to Grace and Lily, visible through the window, arguing over whose turn it was to choose the movie. My father built that company. When he died, everyone said I could not handle it, that I was too young, too female, too inexperienced. You proved them wrong. I did. But somewhere along the way, proving them wrong became more important than anything else. More important than my health. More important than my daughter. More important than actually living my life. Elizabeth turned to face him, her eyes bright with emotion. I missed Grace's entire childhood. I was so busy being CEO that I forgot to be a mother. And I do not want to miss anymore. I do not want to look back in 10 years and realize I traded my family for a corner office and a stock price. So you are walking away. I am choosing something different. Elizabeth took his hand. The board has approved a transition plan. I will stay on as chair consult on major decisions. But the 18-hour days and the constant crisis management, that is over. What will you do instead? Elizabeth smiled, and Daniel saw in that smile a future he had never dared to imagine. Remember what you said about second chances, about helping people who fell through the cracks, Daniel nodded. I want to build something around that, a foundation, a program, something that helps people the way you helped me. Single parents, veterans, kids who do not have anyone in their corner. Daniel thought about the shelters he had slept in after Sarah died, the food banks where he had stood in line with Lily, the endless job applications that went nowhere because he was too old, too experienced, too much of a risk. I know what it is like to be invisible, he said it softly, to work hard and still have nothing, to watch your kid go hungry because the system was not built for people like you. So let us build something different. Elizabeth squeezed his hand. Together. Daniel looked at the woman beside him, at the house behind them, at the daughters who were learning to be sisters in the warm light of the living room. He thought about Sarah and the promise he had made to stay visible. He thought about the journey that had brought him from the sub-basement of Sterling Tower to this porch, this moment, this impossible second chance. Yes, he said it like a vow. Let us build something different. The wedding happened on a Saturday in June. It was small by design, held in the backyard of their Westchester home, with only the people who mattered in attendance. Family, what little they had. Friends from the foundation they had spent the past months building. A handful of Sterling Corporation employees who had become something like extended family. Tommy Rodriguez stood in the front row and cried through the entire ceremony. Lily and Grace served as co-maids of honor, a title they had invented themselves and defended against anyone who suggested it was not traditional. They wore matching dresses in different colors, a compromise reached after negotiations that had lasted 2 weeks and required Daniel's mediation skills. Bear, the German Shepherd they had adopted 3 months earlier, wore a bow tie and spent most of the ceremony trying to eat it. Daniel stood at the altar in a simple gray suit, watching Elizabeth walk toward him through the afternoon light. She wore white, but not a gown. A simple dress that let her move and breathe, that did not require armor or pretense. She was smiling, really smiling, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and transformed her entire face. He had never seen anyone more beautiful. The officiant was an old army chaplain Daniel had served with in Afghanistan, a man who had seen him at his worst and still believed in his best. He spoke about love and commitment and the courage it took to let someone truly see you. He spoke about second chances and new beginnings and the families we build when the ones we were born into are not enough. Then it was time for the vows. Elizabeth went first. A year ago, I thought I knew what strength looked like. I thought it meant never showing weakness, never asking for help, never letting anyone see the parts of yourself that were not perfect. She looked at Daniel with eyes that held no walls, no armor, no pretense. I was wrong. Strength is not about being invulnerable. It is about being willing to be vulnerable. It is about reaching out when you are drowning. It is about letting someone see you, really see you, and trusting them not to look away. Her voice cracked, but she continued. You saw me, Daniel, at my worst, at my most broken, and instead of running, you stayed. You held me together when I could not hold myself. You taught me that being loved is not about being perfect. It is about being present. Elizabeth squeezed his hands. I promise to see you back. Every day. In your strength, in your struggle, and everything in between. I promise to show up even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. I promise to build something with you, not a company or a foundation or a legacy. A life. A real life full of late-night conversations and Sunday dinners and two girls who think we are embarrassing but love us anyway. She smiled through her tears. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your home, for as long as you will have me. Daniel took a breath. I am not good with words. Never have been. I am better with my hands, fixing things, building things, making broken stuff work again. He looked at Elizabeth, at this woman who had changed everything. But some things cannot be fixed. Some things are broken in ways that no amount of work can repair. And I spent a long time thinking I was one of those things. After Sarah died, after I lost everything, I thought the best I could hope for was survival. Just getting through each day without falling apart. He shook his head. Then I met you. And you were frustrating, stubborn, certain you knew everything when you did not know anything at all. You fired me in front of my daughter. You made me feel invisible. A soft laugh rippled through the guests. But then you called me back. When everything was falling apart, you called back the janitor you had just humiliated. And that was when I realized you were not the cold, untouchable CEO I thought you were. You were scared and alone and desperate for someone to see past the armor. Daniel reached up and touched her face. I saw you, Elizabeth. And what I saw was beautiful. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, honest, brave in ways you did not even recognize. And I thought this woman has been waiting her whole life for someone to show up for her, really show up. Not for her money or her power or what she could give them, just for her. His voice dropped. I am showing up now, and I am going to keep showing up every single day, in the good times and the bad times and the boring times in between. I will be here, present, steady, yours. He smiled. I promise to keep fixing things, even when you insist they are not broken. I promise to make breakfast and walk the dog and pretend to lose at board games so the kids feel good about themselves. I promise to listen when you talk and hold you when you cry and tell you the truth even when you do not want to hear it. Daniel leaned closer. And I promise to love you, not the idea of you, not the CEO or the philanthropist or the woman the world sees, just you, the real you, the one who is scared and stubborn and strong and soft all at the same time. He kissed her forehead. That is my promise, and I do not break my promises. The kiss that followed lasted long enough for Grace to groan and Lily to announce that she was timing it. 14 seconds. Lily declared, new record. The reception was chaos in the best possible way. Music and laughter and the kind of joy that came from people who had earned their happiness through struggle. Daniel danced with both girls, twirling them around the makeshift dance floor until they were dizzy and giggling. Elizabeth watched from the edge of the crowd, her face soft with an emotion that needed no name. Later, after the guests had gone and the girls had fallen asleep in lawn chairs, Daniel and Elizabeth sat on the back porch and watched the stars. I keep waiting to wake up. Elizabeth's voice was barely above a whisper. This feels like a dream. It is not a dream. Daniel took her hand. Dreams do not have dirty dishes and mortgage payments and kids who leave their shoes in the middle of the hallway. Elizabeth laughed softly. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, for coming back, for being stubborn enough to keep showing up even when I gave you every reason not to. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You know what the funny thing is? I spent my whole life trying to be invisible, trying to do my job without being noticed. And then I met you and you noticed me anyway, even when I did not want you to. Was that bad? No. He squeezed her hand. That was the beginning of everything. The foundation launched the following spring. They called it Second Chance, a name that Daniel had suggested and Elizabeth had immediately embraced. Within 6 months, they had helped 200 families get back on their feet. Within a year, they had programs in 12 cities. Patricia Holloway, who had cooperated fully with the prosecution and received a reduced sentence of community service, became one of their first volunteers. She worked in the administrative office, using the skills she had spent decades developing to help others find their footing. It was not the CEO position she had dreamed of. It was something better. It was meaningful. The work was not glamorous. It was messy and complicated and filled with failures alongside the successes. but it was real. It was making a difference in people's lives, one family at a time. On a Sunday morning in October, 5 years after the night Daniel first walked back into Sterling Tower, the family gathered for breakfast. Nothing special. Pancakes and bacon and too much coffee. Bear begging for scraps under the table. Grace texting friends between bites. Lily reading a veterinary textbook because she had decided animals needed saving as much as people did. Normal. Ordinary. Perfect. Elizabeth looked around the table at the people she loved. The husband who had seen her when no one else did. The daughters who had taught her that family was not about blood, but about choice. The dog who had chewed through 3 pairs of her shoes and somehow become the most spoiled creature on the planet. This was what she had been running from her whole life. The mess, the chaos, the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful ordinariness of being truly known. And now it was hers. "What are you smiling about?" Daniel asked. "Nothing." "Everything." Elizabeth reached across the table and took his hand. "Just thinking about how strange life is. How the worst day can become the first day. How the person you fire can become the person you marry. That is the thing about second chances." Daniel's voice was warm with certainty. They do not come from nowhere. They come from the choices we make. The courage to see people differently. The willingness to be seen ourselves. Grace groaned. "You two are being embarrassing again. Get used to it." Lily did not look up from her textbook. "They do this all the time." Bear barked at something outside. The girls returned to their argument about weekend plans. The morning continued in its ordinary rhythm, filled with the small moments that made a life. Daniel looked at his family and felt something settle in his chest. Not happiness exactly. Something deeper than that. Something that felt like home. Some people look at things but do not really see them. But Daniel Shaw was not one of those people. He had never been one of those people. And now finally that difference was not a burden. It was a blessing.